welcome everybody. And today we are going to be talking about offer still, and then specifically getting kind of my take on getting traffic and leads for yourself and for your offer and as part of your overall offer toolbox. And I'm starting to see how we'll go through the rest of the alchemies. Likely we will do a session on product related to offer, and on conversion related to offer, and on probably one on just business planning in general, also related to offer. And then in the last two sessions, I might do a sort of recap session having to do with goals and achievement that way, and resistance and dealing with that kind of thing. And then I'll probably do a recap on the idea of the method of knowing and thinking and so forth. And that's my tentative plan. We'll see what happens in reality, but that's my plan. That's a reasonable one, right, for now. Good morning. Great, we got people all over, as always here. All right, let's get going. We got two main slides here. All right, the first is a bit of framing, but I think it'll be a bit of an aha, or at least a partial aha, a further aha for many, and maybe a full-on aha for some, maybe all. So let's see here. Talking about offer overall, and the traffic getting and lead getting will of course fit in as part of this. But I thought to break it down this way and to also relate it to our overall way of approaching life in alchemy. So regarding sustained monetization, then we can think in terms of, so normally on the surface people, they might use the word offer, but often people want a business, they want a job, they want a resume, they want to be an entrepreneur. What else do they want? A product, right? That sort of thing. A service, they identify themselves that way. So a lot of the identification and thinking is, in essence, on the surface here. And on the surface, things are vulnerable, they're fairly rigid, right? And we can kind of miss the point. And but basically between being fragile and sort of restrictive, right? If you have a business, then it's hard to make in the first place, especially if you're just picturing it on this level here of offer, like or on the surface here, not even thinking about the word offer necessarily, but if you're thinking, all right, I want to have a business for myself, then without realizing what goes underneath it in terms of the this type of thinking with the offer toolbox method and your offer toolbox, then you're trying to go sort of directly after this surface idea, but without really knowing how. And then you're trying to follow a method that's also sort of on the surface, where you're trying to figure out instructions or approximate your way and navigate your way through to this idea of having a business. And then once you even have a functioning business of some sort, then it's often a treadmill and a lot of duct tape, metaphorically speaking, to keep things working. And if it's fragile, it can be scary in a number of ways. There's times we might have a lot of pride and excitement about it, but then the next week we might be kind of dejected or have taken a real blow or something like that. And if we don't realize what the anti-fragile, the inevitable success, both model and method that underlie it, then again it's harder to reach, and it's fragile and rigid when we do reach it. Same thing if it's a job. And so forth. And even if it's like a website that gets affiliate money, where you might not think of that as a full business, but it's still like kind of an income stream or something, it's the same type of story on the surface. If we don't have an idea of both the right model and the method underlying the model. So when we have the correct method and the correct model, then we can think and live in terms of sustained monetization. We're anti-fragile in the sense that I talked about last time, where whatever feedback we get, whether and actually, I can add something to anti-fragile. Anti-fragile is the idea that if you get battered around, that you improve, right? And that's true when you have a method that is when you're based on a method and a model like this, where you have your method for building your offer toolbox, right? Your offer toolbox is not just your products and services. It is potential aspects of your sales funnel. It's something you can say when you first meet somebody that might be relevant for your business, which might be nearly everyone, right? Depending on your situation, because even if any person you meet might not buy your product or service, they might know somebody who might, and they might mention you if something comes up. So there's that. There's what you would do if someone starts to follow up with you, right? There's the different ways that you might actually package a particular product or service depending on the needs of a particular customer or potential or actual joint venture partner or client or anything like that, right? So you use your toolbox to craft not just a product or service that is applicable for that time, or it might be that you only offer one product or service that year, but next year you adjust things, right? So for the particular time or the particular person or the particular venture or the particular type of relationship, right? Again, client relationship, partner, joint venture partner relationship, or just a customer relationship. So you're crafting a product or service for any of those, and that can change. But then it's not just about a product or service, it's about a sales funnel, right, in many cases, because there's various points of contact. It's easy to see online, right? If someone opts in and you communicate with them in various ways, maybe they fill out a form on your website, whatever it might be, or if you meet somebody in person, then maybe you have a contact by email or by a social service or LinkedIn or something, and then you talk on the phone, or you exchange a couple emails, you talk on the phone, you meet in person. And I'm only speaking hypothetically. I'm not saying that's the way to do it or not, but for example, and if you're doing that, there's in essence an offer each time, right, or a specific offer each time, and where's that going to come from? Your offer toolbox, right? So it's more than just your product or service. There's a reason for them to get on the phone for a particular meeting, right, or for a reason for you to meet in person. The offer might be, I'll show you a presentation, right? The presentation itself might be talking about the end product or service, but again, there's still an actual offer for them to meet at that meeting, which is different. The offer of showing them a presentation is different than your actual product or service. And when you think of that presentation as an offer, it's a smart way of thinking about it because you realize that meeting itself is a transaction, right? And so again, this model will keep serving you. And what's the difference if you think of it as a transaction? Well, you think of it in terms of what's in it for them and what's in it for me. And you'll also probably do and think in a way, act and think in a way where they're more likely to show up when you think of it like a transaction, right? Because when you're clear about what's in it for you and what's in it for them, then you can, if you're accidentally thinking too much just what's in it for you and not what's in it for them, for example, for that meeting itself, you might be thinking what's in it for them, like let's say you're helping them get traffic to their business, right, with any number of methods that we show on OMG. And you're going to have a presentation that, like a meeting, right, like at Starbucks or something, or at your office. And you want them to show up. And I don't mean from OMG, but just in general in life, people show up about half the time to meetings like that. OMGers might do much better. I don't actually know. But certainly sometimes people show up, sometimes they don't. And also they might show up in a certain frame of mind. And you might have been able to adjust that frame of mind in the first place, right? Because if what they thought the offer was for the meeting is different than what you thought what you were offering them was, right? Then there could not be a meeting of the minds in the meeting, and you might have a much harder time making the sale. You see? So again, the meeting itself as an offer, you can treat it that way, and you can make sure, just like if you're writing a sales letter like I might for an information product, I make sure that you can recognize that what I describe in the sales letter is full of recognizable things, right? Actual webinars that you'll get, or specific people you'll be learning from, right? Specific topics. you can then come into the information product, right, and you can recognize those things, right? So there's a clear offer on the sales letter, and then it's pretty recognizable when someone gets inside. That leads to satisfaction, it leads to consumption, and it leads to people kind of taking the next step in many cases, whatever that might be with us, right? Maybe participating, leaving an earnings report, continuing on for another year if we offer something, coming to our live event, that sort of thing. Well, it's the same thing with a presentation that you might do, that you might think of as a sales presentation for a potential client, right? In and of itself, that you should think of it, when you think in terms of offer, it all follows the same structure as if you sold them an information product. And the price is they show up in the meeting, right? And the offer is, and they already have something in mind that they're buying, but like they're buying it by coming, right, to the meeting. They're traveling there at a certain time and showing up. And if you think of it like, okay, like I wouldn't try to sell a product by saying, oh, well, you just kind of pay nothing and you get something, right? Or you pay something and you get something, right? Or I'll sell you something, right? The presentation, again, when you think of it like like an offer, a product, like almost like a product and a meeting of the minds, and where you're selling them on coming to the meeting. And that doesn't mean when you're selling someone something, again, when you think in terms of offer, you don't even phrase it that way, right? All these transactions are, it's not that you're selling or not, you're having an offer where you're certainly letting them know what the offer is back and forth, right? What you want and what they want. Or they might be letting you know something, but you're having a communication with somebody else. If I'm writing a sales letter, we can't really talk back and forth very well, so I'm pretty much saying how it is, and then people can accept it. If you're having a little bit of a back and forth communication, there might be a little bit of that. But if it's going to be a client type of meeting, then you still might be mostly telling them how it is, right? But however much conversation there is, that can be helpful as well. But one way or the other, you, just like if you're writing a sales letter for a product that then they're buying and they're getting into and using, you want to give them specific benefits. And again, it's not that you're giving, sure, you're giving them benefits so they show up. But when you think in terms of offer, it's not the same type of thinking about sales where you're like selling at them, right, in order to get them to come. When I'm dealing with an offer, I'm not doing something at someone with the goal of getting them to necessarily accept it. My goal is a meeting of the minds. Do you see the difference? Like, I don't want someone to accept my offer, so to speak, or to claim to accept to, if they don't really know what it is and actually want it and want to pay and want to give me what I want in return, right? An offer is a two-way street, right? If I'm not going to get what I'm looking for in return, and then there's no point in it for me, right? And now if I'm just trying to help somebody purely and not looking for something in return, then still I'm looking for something in return. I'm looking for the person to consume the help that I'm giving them, right? Like on Alchemy, I'm mostly doing it for you guys, but I still, in order to get the benefit of me helping, of you being helped, then you have to consume it, right? I don't need it to be tied to me or not, but at least if I want you to be helped, then you would need to listen, like you obviously are, if you're hearing this. So when you're going to make a meeting with somebody, then they need to have a meeting of the minds as well of what they're doing. Like, if you look at it the wrong way, they have a 50% chance of showing up. If you look at it a much better way, or whatever chance. But if you look at it a better way, they have a much higher chance. You're going to naturally speak and act in a way where they're much more likely going to show up, because they're really like stealing from you if they don't show up, if you have a meeting of the minds, right? Because you're preparing, you're going there. They're basically buying what you have to offer in that presentation by even promising to show up and then showing up, right? But once they promise, you're relying on them. So you want, again, them to show up. If they say they will and they don't, it's like it's like if someone got inside of, sent me a check, which we don't do, but just if someone sent me a check and it bounced, right, I would let them into the product, let's say, and then they don't, someone doesn't pay for some reason. or they don't complete their payment plan when they said they would, or something like that. So a promise to show up really only hurts you if it's not fulfilled upon. So you want to be clear what you want, and then when you're clear what you want, it makes it easy to realize the other person wants something, and making sure that you let them know what it is that they're going to get. And again, you're doing this all for a meeting of the minds. That's a more effective way to sell anyway, right? And it makes more sense to people. It's more natural, which is an important thing for conversion. It's like a category that I'll talk about this when I talk about conversion, but people have a series of categories that you really want to get into to have a much better chance of making a sale, of converting them. And one of those categories is natural or unnatural, regarding you, your product, the whole situation, regarding your offer. Basically, your offer. And again, by offer, I don't mean a product. I mean kind of the whole situation we're talking about here. If it's natural, and it's natural for you to have a benefit and them to get a benefit. It's natural for you to value your own time reasonably and explain to them that, like saying that they're going to come to a meeting and not showing up would be like hiring you to fix their roof. You fix it and they don't pay you. Right, and you don't have to phrase it in those terms exactly. You can find your own way to communicate that in a way that works for you. But again, you will show them what they're going to get that they want better when you're also used to thinking in terms of what you want as well, and you getting that, and just offer in general. You'll naturally, I know I'm talking about traffic and leads, but of course these all kind of interrelate, and then you'll naturally do a better presentation. And this will also, if I click over to this other slide quickly, I'll click back. But when we're getting leads, which of course you understand what that is, traffic, leads, new potential customers. And this is the same thing, again, with joint venture partnering, right? Any kind of partnering with other people. It's a similar thing. When I talk about a lead, it doesn't need to be like someone you've never met before. So really what we want to think of is in terms of vectors. And a vector, again, is like a force in a particular direction. You can think of it, if it's easier to picture, you can picture wind blowing in a certain direction or water current going in a certain direction. And what does that mean? Well, for example, if an affiliate who has a good amount of respect and relationship with people that affiliate interacts with, like Bob Proctor or Ty Lopez or any number of other people, if they have a good relationship with people that end up being on their email list or following them in any number of ways, and then that person refers you to OMG, then the person comes to OMG with a certain vector, right? And it might not be fully pointing in our direction where they have like full faith in us and they just want to buy anything that we say or whatever, right? So vectors have an angle to them, but some amount of that vector is going to be towards us, right, in a good direction. If you were to, on the opposite extreme, if you were to just start dialing numbers in the phone book, right, then not only would there be no vector, that actually would be a vector against you typically, right, because you would be calling someone on their phone who didn't show any interest in you calling them, and so you'd actually start out behind, right? Plus you would look, because that would probably be annoying for most people. For some it might not be, they really might just want to call from anyone, but for many you'd be behind. And then on top of that you would look pretty desperate and it would look pretty unnatural, right? So the vector would be very much against you, or the current would be very much against you when it came to making the sale. And I don't just mean the sale of your final product. Again, I mean the sale of any next part of the contacts in your relationship progression or your sales funnel. Right? Those are in essence synonyms: sales funnel, relationship progression. Instead of using the words eyeballs or leads or whatever, I don't know what might be the perfect word, but you might think of them as accelerated leads if you want to, or vectored people, whatever. But as long as your internal model pays attention to where that person's current is going at the moment. And you can adjust the current. That's what, or adjust your sail, like for the, for the wind blowing in a sail or whatever, and that's what the sales funnel does. That's what the relationship progression does, right? Is sort of adjust the current. That's what having more communications does. So the vector can switch, but there's still a large difference between where you're starting with in terms of the vector. So you want to start to feel and think in that way. And once you start thinking that way to begin with a prospect or lead or traffic, then it's easier to continue thinking that way in terms of the continued progression of your communications and relationships, right? So all the way through, you want to think, when you're thinking in terms of traffic, in terms of vectors. And then it'll also cause you to properly prioritize, value, resource manage, right? What's strategy about? Right? It's about the alternative use of limited resources, right? And so you need to know how to value and prioritize different places that you can put your resources, your focus, your money, time, and so forth when it comes to lead getting and when it comes to splitting your business in general monetization focus between getting leads and doing sales and building or fulfilling your product or service. And thinking in terms of vectors will help you to see things more properly, to value things that have to do with your leads and your traffic more accurately. All right, let's go back here. Excuse me. So with the overall framing here, you're building your offer toolbox in general for your whole money-getting life, right? Or the money-getting aspect of your life. Then when you think in terms of your resource for that, your success for that is directly and only related to your offer toolbox. Then that offer toolbox spits out it has building blocks, it has heuristics, templates, right? Skills that you've learned, products that you've made, anything to do with what you might think of as your business or your monetization strategy. That's part of your offer toolbox, and you use that to craft offers for a specific moment in time, right? You might use it to craft a product, like obviously with OMG, we have products that sit there in a membership area. They're active, and we develop them by doing webinars and so forth. But in one way, and so in that way we are building, we're actually building, nothing really sits there and doesn't even move in our business. So it's it's an example of practicing what I preach. Things don't really stay static, but something could stay static, and that would be perfectly valid, right? You could have a product manufactured and white label it, and deal with Amazon that way, or have your e-commerce store. But even then, you would probably, for the next run, you might have some things that you learn, and you might switch something, possibly. And if it's all working, you might not. So anyway, the point is it could be static for a while, right? It doesn't mean you always have to switch your offer every second. But still, your offer is just something that is created to fit the situation. If the situation still calls for the same product or service exactly, then great. But when you think in terms of your offer toolbox, then you can ask the question properly. Instead of having confirmation bias, right? If you're if you don't think this way, if you're mainly just seeing your product or service on the surface, then you want to believe that it doesn't have to change, because you're not thinking in terms of a toolbox that can help you change it, right? And so you want to believe that it's already good enough and the right thing, and you won't be asking the right questions. You'll be asking questions that'll lead you to confirm that it doesn't have to change, rather than asking questions that will cause it to build and change as appropriate. And again, I'm not saying you should change it for no reason, or just for the sake of looking, for whatever, basically whatever might amount to no reason. I'm not saying change is better, right? Change takes resources which could be used somewhere else. So in that way, it's worse. But of course, if you fit the new situation better, or if you improve on the relative to the old situation, then you might have spent your resources in a good way, where that might have been the most efficient use of your resources to improve on your actual product or service. So we think in terms of offer toolbox, and this can keep getting improved. This isn't really subject to decay or getting beaten up by the world or destroyed or whatever, right? Your individual products and services could have issues. Circumstances could change. Someone could leave a bad review or whatever, right? Competitors can come in. One of the benefits I want you to get from Alchemy as a whole is to be able to almost completely or fully completely, it's a little redundant, but to not think about competition or think in terms of competition. Unless it's somehow absolutely necessary to be aware of some sort of competition, then I basically wouldn't. It's constantly unhelpful in every way. It's less efficient and so forth. When you're focused here, and this is your whole reality, is like your product or service, then you're constantly thinking in terms of competition, right? You just kind of can't help it. When you think in terms of your offer toolbox, it's much less because you can build this and no one can really mess with you. And you're naturally going to be so far ahead of so much of the supposed competition, or all of it, that it won't really, it's another reason you won't have to worry about it. And the competition can even help you in various ways improving on your offer toolbox, learning from them or even directly. And even the supposed competition itself could be actually become an ally in various ways to help you with all sorts of things, new prospects, or you can team up and work on a project together or an event together or whatever. Then as you focus on your offer toolbox, now you're able to glance over here and see and learn, especially as you're aware of it, the method itself for building your offer toolbox. And what does your offer toolbox consist of? It consists of skills. It consists of sales lines, elevator pitch, pretty much anything that has to do with traffic, conversion, or product for your monetization, which is mostly anything to do with your monetization that's actual, either an idea, a sales line, a sales presentation, a part of a sales presentation, anything that can be used to create or put into a product. This is all part of your offer toolbox, right? Anything that helps you get leads, sell the product, or make a product, or adjust a product. As you just build that, and as you build this in life, do you think you're going to get further and further ahead? Right? Do you think that you're not going to become quite successful if you just focus on building this? You see? And then as you focus on building this, you get used to the method of building your toolbox. So now you're developing your method, and this is parallel to like a model, right? It can be composed of actual stuff as well, like tangible things, or things on the internet. But here's what you do, and you have this feedback loop between you're learning more about the method for how to build your offer, even like how to learn more efficiently, and a lot of learning is just unblocking your mind. Your mind naturally learns except for when it's blocked, or it needs to have a sense of what's important, right? Your mind's going to learn basically what seems important if it's not blocked. And the more you understand that, that's part of your method for building your offer toolbox, right? Your skills and so forth you have to learn. So here's where you focus, and then you naturally are able to create what you need when you need it better and better. And this whole way of thinking takes you more and more out of fight or flight mode in life. People, skipping down to the bottom here, people basically are like a fish in water with being in fight or flight mode primarily, without hardly realizing it in life, and at least a kind of financial desperation mode, where your thinking and your actions are constantly just surface-based, right? And I'll relate it to this line here too. But people are just thinking in terms of their thoughts or their actions, justifying their actions, confident that their thoughts are already correct, much like with your product or service, justifying that it's already good and correct, wanting it to be right already, justifying it, right, our product or service that we've already made. And when you're just operating, and this is all you can really see or think about, same thing with like if it's a business, right? If someone's only thinks in terms of, oh, I have this business, and then they're like in fight or flight mode constantly, because they're constantly trying to get their business better at fighting the competition, or they're scared and worried about some potential blow to their business, right? So it's a desperate get ready for the next attack, get ready to defend against the next thing. And people don't even know what to do outside of this. Even if there's no fighting or flighting going on that's necessary, then people will basically act as if they have some form of post-traumatic stress disorder, and they're ready for the next fight or flight to happen, right? Or they'll almost just create drama or some issue, or just expand so fast that now they're back in fight or flight mode because they took this risk to take advantage of some opportunity, and now they're back there. When you're there, even biologically, both kind of logically and biologically, it's very difficult to go back and think about this offer toolbox or offer toolbox method. And then in life overall, as we live there, and again, even if people don't actually have anything making them desperate, they act that way. They get desperate about the craziest stuff. The most day-to-day routine stuff will get people upset or frantic or in a panic or flustered or anxious, right? And nothing could be going on of any consequence, and people will still act that way. Because again, once again, look at school, private or public. Often, by the way, public-private partnerships are worse than just direct government stuff. But what was school? It was nothing but trivial BS, right? Can you imagine how long you spent in school? It was 12 years before college, and if you went to college, roughly 4 years, and maybe something after college for some of us. What is that? About 16 years roughly, when virtually everything you learned was pointless, and yet every day felt like the world might end, right, to some degree. I mean, I know depending on how seriously we took school and so forth. But basically, the more successful you were with school, the more you were in this fight or flight. Like fight or flight is kind of how you deal with school, right? Like every test is god awful important, and if you don't have that attitude, then you're probably doing worse in school, right? So your whole childhood was fight or flight over trivial matters, stuff that had really no consequence. And so then people just don't know any other way to deal with life. This is a very, very novel way of looking at monetization, right? Even though I describe it, it seems pretty obviously better and kind of like it maybe always was obvious or should have been obvious. But in practice, I don't think people are doing this. And then in life, for damn sure, people aren't coming anywhere near this, where what people have, they have thoughts, right? This is good. That person's a jerk. I can do this. I can't do this, right? They have it's constant stream of conclusions. And then people also perform actions. They do stuff, right? And they're just trying to justify that their actions are already right and good and smart and that their thoughts are already true and correct and their conclusions are correct. And the more a guru reinforces this for you and tells you that you're basically right, or they show you that you were wrong in the future, but now you're right because you're listening to that guru, and so forth, then the better in many cases. What we want to do is work on getting our ideas actually correct and our model for the world actually correct. What people typically do is assume that it's correct and justify it. Once in a while, they'll make some changes. They might get outside of a particular conceptual box. But what we want to do is be looking here, where my cursor is pointing to what I call the knowing method, how to understand what's correct, how to understand what's true, as I spent a lot of the early and middle alchemy sessions dealing with. This is the type of question that people in practice clearly spend basically zero time thinking about. It's of absolutely zero importance intuitively to people. In most every case is, how can I know what's true? Except to justify stuff, maybe, right? People will literally say, I believe this because I am, and then they'll name a category, a political or religious affiliation, or a member of some other group, or whatever, or just a smart person, or a thinking person, or an educated person, or an informed voter, or whatever. Therefore, I think this. Therefore, I believe that, because of a label. Like, the label actually serves in people's mind as a full and valid reason for why they do their thoughts or actions. Right? I'm a student, therefore this is important. Right? So again, literally the label is their method of knowing. Can you imagine? But that's real. Right? That's how people actually think and act, is they have an identity, and that identity serves as feels like a fully foundational, justified reason for why they think they do and why they act the way they do. Or I'm an American, or I'm this other country, or I'm this sub identity, right? This type of American, or this type of person of any sort. And that's why I think this way. That's why I act this way. So that's another proof by an extreme and showing how absurd it is, that people don't really think about their model, right? Instead, their model's blocked by like a label or a category, and then they just gives them an excuse to justify their thoughts and their actions. You need to open up, just like you have to open up your toolbox, right, in order to have more stuff in it. You need to open up your ideas, whether they're correct or not, genuinely, and their model for the world. And once you open it up, you realize, wait a second, I need a method by which to fill it properly. Same thing with your offer toolbox. When you go to start to put together your offer, which again does not mean just your product or service, right, but your way of presenting it, your offer to people just to get to know you or just to begin some kind of communication with you, you need an offer, right, for that too. So when you put together your offer toolbox, then you realize, wow, so how do I do that? What's my method? Then you go to learn, by the way, and then you revert to your learning method, which you learned in school most likely, which is that learning is something done to you by a teacher. And you sit there passively and helplessly, and the teacher does something to you or they don't, and you like the teacher if you feel like what they're doing for you is something that you want or need, and you kind of dislike them or feel like there's something wrong with the teacher if what they're doing to you is you passively are there. Or you might say, I'm not passive, I'm following instructions. Right? Well, that's passive, right? Then it's done to you. If you want the teacher to give you instructions and you just feel like you need to follow those instructions and get your reward. And the teachers go right along with that for most of our lives, and they create their own amazing scam that I talked about last time, where they actually come up with their own tests. And if you pass the test the teacher gives you, then you learned, and the teacher supposedly gave you value. Can you imagine? That seems, what I just described probably seems so normal. You might even wonder what my point is. But think about that with OMG. If all we had to do was give you a test that we ourselves made, and all you had to do was get a certain score on that test, and then we all felt justified, great. We could just all go home, right? Right? I just come up with a test that at least somewhat justified on the surface, makes sense. We teach you how to score a certain amount on it, and then everyone's satisfied. No one has to make any money. No one has to get any real-world results. No reality whatsoever. But that's what we're used to. There's no reality. It's all surreal in school. There's no result whatsoever in reality regarding school for 16 years, and people hardly notice, and then they have their kids do the same thing. It's all completely circular. The teachers, or it's laundered, like ideologically laundered, where some other person makes a test and the teacher teaches to it, right? It wouldn't be any difference if someone else could make a test that OMG got to teach you the answers to, and then you get a certain score, and then we all go home happy, right? That would be like a million times easier, or whatever, infinitely easier than what we actually do, which is to help you in reality. Helping in reality is an incredibly novel concept. It hardly exists. That's why OMG, again, I have to mention, just in context, it's like 50 to 100 times the results as what people might get even in a great program, and like infinitely better results than otherwise. Than like school or something like that. Of course, someone could say you go to school, you get a job, but again, it's all circular. Like you're not using what you learned at school for the job in almost every case. Let's see here. So I could have put another line in here about learning, right? Where we want to get our method for learning correct. By default, it's all screwed up. Learning isn't something done for you or done to you. And perhaps I'll expand on that. I can try to draw one out for a future webinar. Okay. Once you learn to think this way, you're in such incredibly good shape that, of course, I'll help you further, right? But you'll be asking the right questions and naturally creating your right answers. But just from my 20 years of experience, I can give you some, help you to more accurately value a certain few things. I'm not personally going to teach you about the type of traffic getting that you learn in the OMG programs, where it's, of course, through like search engines of various types and social media and so forth. I have people that are doing that, do that. But I have achieved my financial success, and I've still had to, if we think of me in a vacuum, not as OMG for a moment, but David Mills had to get leads, so to speak, and then partners and clients, because I've done consulting, and then as part of the businesses that I was doing, they had to get leads. And so here's how I look at it, and here's my things that have helped me to do it. And I've done a lot. Most of what I've done with my life is things having to do with partnering and consulting. So that'll be very helpful. A lot of what you're, in essence, of course, you're taught directly with people doing the exact type of consulting that you're doing and how they get leads that way. But a lot of what you're learning is how to get traffic to a business in general. But this will really help you guys to see things for yourself in a kind of a separate angle. All right, so the first thing I wrote here under the vectors, not eyeballs thing, is I wrote, you likely don't value, these are personal skills, or you could call it a personality type. I'm not trying to make them into a personality type exactly or not, but roughly speaking, that's what I mean when I say connectors and openers. You likely don't value people who act as connectors and people that act as openers enough. And then I wrote underneath that in parentheses, the funny thing is these people are actually easier to find and connect with, but people don't realize to value them enough. So when you go to a networking situation, for example, a convention or a specific meeting or chamber of commerce, there are going to be people there that are naturally have an easier time opening people. Of course, some of you guys might be one of these people as well. It isn't really better or worse, but this will help you to value yourself and understand yourself better and utilize it better as well. So whoever you are. For me, I'm neither of these, connector or opener, but I have watched over the years that by valuing these people that do this properly, that I get so much farther ahead, and I value them. I think I value them accurately, and very roughly speaking, I might value them like, let's say, 3 times more than other people tend to by default naturally, and so I get just infinitely more results out of that. You can kind of get nothing from this whole opportunity by valuing it sort of normally, or get very little, or you can just really get a lot by valuing it properly. You can kind of get almost infinite by valuing it just maybe about 3 times as much, roughly speaking. What people will do is they'll value gatekeepers, and they will call them sir and ma'am and kiss their ass and do whatever for those people. And those are people who, just by their position, have achieved a clear, obvious Rolodex, so to speak, back in the past. I guess people don't need I've never used one, but yeah, it's kind of the old word, but I'm sure we probably know it. They have their contact list. I don't know what the word for it today is in someone's list on their phone or something. Contact list. But those people are pretty obvious, and people are normally going for them directly, And that's where you probably aren't going to get much bang for your buck. But you can get to those people anyway if you want to. The hint with those people, which I didn't write on the slide, but is to deal with their wings. That's wings like birds' wings, but sorry, it's spelled and pronounced the same, but has a different meaning, of course. But the people around those people, the more, especially the more overlooked the people around them might be, the better an opportunity they probably are for you, right? Secretary is more obvious because the secretary is a gatekeeper to the decision maker. So the decision maker is a gatekeeper, but the secretary is too. So people have an easy time, when there's a wall with a gate, they have an easy time valuing the gate. And what you are going to value more, after me saying this very possibly, is all the other ways to get in the wall, right, over the wall into the town where all the money is, other than the gate, okay? And other than the guard in front of the gate, right, the secretary. And so there are other people, right, who work with or whatever, a gatekeeper, who might not be so obvious, and they might not be able to, with just a word, get you in with this big decision maker of some sort, but they're going to add up for you. And there can be they might not be able to just sign you on to their schedule like the secretary can, but in the right time and moment, they can get you in, if that makes sense. Or you get a critical mass of them, and then the guy's like, yeah, I've heard of you from 3 different people, or something like that. And then, you can get through that way. So those are the wings, and I didn't write this on the slide, but the wings of a gatekeeper. Secretary is not a wing, and they're just like a guard in front of the gate. Of course, if you can get to the secretary and you realize what to say to such a person, and you can learn that from other people, they're better at it than me. And I don't even know who those people are. Certainly OMG coaches know in some cases, but and then there could be people outside with courses about that. And how to get to the gatekeeper directly with various ways of saying stuff, that's fine. But that isn't how I personally operate in my life. And so I'm just giving you my take on things. I want to be emphatic that I'm not telling you that this is the way to get traffic and the other ways are invalid. And for example, I'm not covering social media. That's incredibly valid. I'm not covering ranking on Google. That's incredibly valid. And I'm not, as I said, talking about exact strategies for talking to the secretary or the decision maker, but those are incredibly valid. But I'm giving you the ways that I've done it, which are alternatives, which will, of course, when it comes to traffic, basically more is more, right? And I usually kind of get you out of the box a little bit and so forth. Now, so that's wings, and that deals with gatekeepers overall. Now, separate from gatekeepers completely, connectors and openers, they might actually be people that aren't very highly respected. Some people, people that are good at opening, like they're just good at kind of talking to people cold. Interestingly enough, they often are people, they're extroverted, but often extroverts actually are not very empathetic. They act, and I'm not being critical in the least here. I'm just explaining things. All of these things they're kind of just different places to put your focus mentally. And so, and there's benefits and drawbacks to wherever you put your focus. So no value judgments here in this particular case. Okay, so extroverts tend to be naturally less empathetic in a lot of cases, especially people that are open, right? People can just walk up to people they've never met and just start talking to them. And that's not the only thing an opener means. An opener can be just talking to people they've met a little bit, but they have not much problem just walking up to them and striking up a conversation. That doesn't come very naturally to me. In an extreme circumstance, I can do it. Once in a while, I'll do it voluntarily. But it's not something I particularly gravitate towards. On the other hand, I'm more introverted and I'm quite empathetic. I don't mean that as a value judgment. I'm not patting myself on the back there. It has drawbacks, but it helps me down the road in dealing with people. And part of being empathetic, at least regarding me, is I don't think I know what someone else is thinking. People that aren't empathetic often think that they're extra empathetic because they project, they just think they already know what people are thinking. Whereas people who are more accurately empathetic, they often tend to realize they don't know what someone else is thinking and they'll listen more, right? Again, I know I'm repeating myself, but just because these words are kind of laden with potential value judgments, I'm explicitly not saying that one of these ways of thinking or operating is better right now. So openers, sometimes people will roll their eyes at them to some degree, right? Sometimes they will kind of embarrass themselves, but without even realizing it. But other times they really will meet people, and they really will meet a lot more people. And plenty of those people will sort of like them, right? And even the people that feel like some person might be a little bit boorish or boring or a little weird or absurd, or at least wrapped up in themselves, that they'll think that the opener is wrapped up in themselves a bit. They'll still, in many cases, they won't dislike the person, right? And they'll kind of intuitively realize some value to them, but not really enough usually. But the point is, these openers can be golden for you because they're taking a lot of the hits, right? Like when you're opening people, it kind of gets people connecting potentially and gets people meeting each other. And so they're kind of willing, but they hardly realize it themselves and they enjoy themselves and it all works, right? But if you're not an opener, then it's very easy to assign a value judgment to openers and to think that they're a little bit absurd and roll your eyes at them. If you instead really value them for what they do, and another thing that will happen with an opener is at first you'll value them and then you'll be like, oh, I need to avoid that person. They're going to keep talking to me or whatever, right? But if you then don't do that and you realize, look, if I'm talking to an opener, they're more going to be talking about themselves. They're not going to really sense very well what I'm feeling or thinking, or if want to get going or listen to me all that much. But they're also going to make it easier for me to meet other people. They might not exactly be quite the same as a connector where they like bridge other people. They connect them to different people. They know a bunch of different people. But they will naturally make it easy for you to meet other people if you blow them off a little less than you'll kind of intuitively feel like doing. And if you look at them and say, oh, well, this person's not a gatekeeper. I don't see what value this person has to me. Plus, they keep talking about themselves. That's the normal reaction of most everyone with someone who's an opener. At first, it's kind of nice. They're talking to someone. They feel good. They're not just alone at an event. But then they might feel like, okay, wait, this person doesn't have a lot of direct value, and plus they keep talking about themselves. If you're smart, you'll get past all that and realize that it's like a blocker, right? If you're playing football and you're a quarterback or running back or something, these people are going to really help you network. And I don't mean you're using them. In my head, by what I'm explaining to you, it's going to help you to not make value judgments about them in your head. You see, I'm showing you this in a way that you'll value them for real in your own head. If you're rolling your eyes in your head at somebody, that's not a great way to live your life. Like if you're like, oh, I'm going to use this person, but I think they're an ass, right? I'm explicitly not saying that. I think what they do is necessary, relevant, helpful, and what I'm saying can help you actually value them even in your own head and heart and so forth. And then you can naturally just listen to them and listen to them a little extra and realize, yeah, okay, they're talking about themselves, but that's just a little bit how they operate. And overall, this is actually a very efficient way for me to meet people in a lot of cases, especially if it's not that easy for you, right? If you're like some kind of ideal person where you can open just the right people, talk just the right amount, and so forth with no status, right? Remember, if you have a bunch of status in whatever situation you're in, then you've already won the game, right? Obviously, if you're high status, you're already like basically a gatekeeper. You do what you want, and you can like if I go to like an OMG Live event, then I could come back and do a webinar about how easy it is to talk to people, how you don't have to be an opener or a connector or anything. People just talk to you and they respect you, and right. But I just have high status in a circular way, right, in an OMG situation or event. So, of course, if you're already like that in a situation, then you don't need anything, right? You just kind of reach out and get what you want. If I wanted to do consulting or have partnerships with OMGers, I could pretty much just announce it or just talk to some people and get it, right, within that sphere because of my status in that sphere that I built up through doing everything I'm talking to you about here over time. And I'm saying that by contrast. I'm saying that because, of course, that's the case, right? And if I were to try to act like that didn't exist and then claim that, oh, I'm so good, but I still remember, I know how I am, and I'm still the same me, if I'm in that ridiculous context in a helpful way for myself, then all this doesn't matter. And so don't be fooled yourself. If you're if you're in places where you have a high status or you're well known, then of course you don't need as much of this, although it can still help you because there's one thing between kind of generally being a little high status or pretty high status and converting that into people that might actually want to do work with you in a business, right? So you might be starting a little bit from scratch there because your status may or may not carry over to something that can really get you to actually having people agree to be clients, such as like in a church or other group that you might be a part of. And you're going to, often if you're looking to expand business, you might be getting out of your comfort zone, right, in various ways, and you're going to find yourself in situations where this will be particularly relevant. So don't project a situation where you're already a veteran or well-known onto what I'm saying here. Although it can still be useful. All right, so that's openers. Now, connectors, and there can be overlap here. I remember, I don't know which book it was, I'm pretty sure it was something, a Malcolm Gladwell book, who wrote Blink and a number of other books, Tipping Point, where, I think it was him, but it may not be him, that pointed out that for most of us, if we think of our friends that we have, and it could be in business too, and probably separately, we know them all pretty much through like one connector, right? And I know that's the case. It's been the case historically for me throughout most of my life. Any kind of particular social group or business group, I can identify that I pretty much know everybody through one particular person, right? And Mike Long, right? My closest friend and person I work with in OMG and have worked with for years prior to OMG, and teamed up with Playing Magic the Gathering before that. Then he fits in this category, right? Of like a bit of an opener, a lot of a connector, and so forth. And so I'm not talking about particular traits or not, but just the general thing of where the Malcolm Gladwell thing is all I'm talking about, of where the people I know tend to, if I think about where I met them, it ended up being through him or a situation created by him. And you may be the same, and again, you may be that connector, in which case you can realize that and in essence value it even more, because people won't realize to value it enough is the thing here. And what I mean specifically is if you can find, especially the more natural ways you can find to do stuff for connectors, unnatural things tend to be much weaker or backfire. So if you just call up a connector and say, hey, let me rank a website for you, then, or let me get you a bunch of social media followers, then that's a little bit unnatural, perhaps, until and unless you find a way to frame it naturally. But if you look for openings where they're saying, oh yeah, I'm doing this new website or doing this new project, and you say, oh man, you've done so much for me, and I've been developing a skill that I'm getting pretty good at with getting social media followers to something, or ranking a website. Let me do it for you. I'll be happy to. You could say, I wouldn't even phrase it like normally I charge. You can say, like realistically for me, it's a win-win because a lot of people I know are through you. I know you connect people. I know you just naturally talk about things, and I value that. And so it's not that I'm saying I'm going to rank this and therefore you tell people, but I just know you kind of naturally will if it has success, and so it's worth it for me to do it. You might explain it that way. That might not be appropriate for the particular person or the situation, so you might need to say something quite different than what I said, but that just gives you a sense of things. Um, and you could work in, if you're like a one-man gang type person where you're doing this yourself, which you normally are starting out or always, then you could say, and look, it's just my own operation. I'm quite skilled at it. I like doing it, but I don't have a lot of overhead. I normally charge a significant amount, but less than people with like a whole business. And I normally do a better job because it's just me focused on it, and I have a passion for it. But it's not going to cost me much, and I'll be happy to do it for you. You know. And so I wouldn't necessarily make it like a totally explicit tit for tat, but it can be kind of, enough that way that you kind of both have a sense of what's going on, but not so much that it puts pressure on you or them, and where it feels kind of reasonably natural. You know how friends do stuff for each other, right? When you do something for a friend, you don't, or even like a business ally, right? This is a good way to think about it. It's you might do something for a business ally, and you're not like, okay, if I do this for you, you exactly do this for me. You don't make it transactional to that extreme in many cases. You just both understand, okay, this person's going to do this for me, and when I have a chance to get them back, I will, right? But you don't make it explicit, and that works out better in certain cases. In other cases, you want a specific transaction, right, in business and in life. In other cases, of course, realistically, it's smarter to have it be a little bit understood. Probably with the situation I'm talking about with connectors, having it a bit understood is in many cases the better way to do it. But you can use your judgment based on the situation and the person and your relationship with them and all that. And depending on, again, the situation and your judgment, you could say, I'll do this thing for you. Future stuff I'd have to charge. I could charge you less, but I'll have to charge. And I can give you the friends and family discount, but I'll have to charge. But this one I'll be happy to do for you. It'll be my pleasure. Whatever. Again, you generally use your judgment. And remember, when I say hitting a target, or you don't have to necessarily hit a bullseye, just to hit a target. So you can't always know the perfect way to frame something or what to say, but you just try to get close enough and move on with your life. And then when you value these connectors and openers enough, see, what happens is their value won't be like steady in a lot of cases. They might connect you with stuff, and then there might not be, or people, and then you might go a year or months or whatever where it doesn't seem obvious that you need this person. And the way that our minds work is, what happened late, what have you done for me lately, right? Like our kind of folder in our mind for a particular person is heavily weighted towards what happened recently. So if one of these people blows you off, doesn't invite you to something, or just kind of does something that just you don't really like or whatever, and then they haven't connected you with someone for a while, or even if they have, but then they did something you don't like, then if you value them enough, then you get past that and you maintain your relationship with the person. Now, of course, if they just don't think of you anymore, then why are they doing that? Did you keep your relationship up with them on your part, right? See, the thing with connectors and openers is they're really easy to maintain relationships with. With people who aren't connectors and openers, then it can be like pulling teeth to keep meeting with them, or at least they view it as you're like selling them something or whatever in some cases, to get together with them or to continue a relationship. But connectors and openers often feel the value just in continuing to connect, right, and to talk. And if an opener wants to talk about themselves, or just kind of what seems important to them, it might not be themselves, but they just kind of pick the topic, then that's a bit of the value trade, right, that you have for them. They get to do that, and you get to benefit from the fact that when they're opening people around you that you can benefit from, right? When you're hanging out with them, they'll naturally talk to other people, and then you'll be there. And you won't have to do the opening and the drawbacks to it sometimes. And it's also just harder. If you happen to be more empathetic, it's just harder to open people. So in a lot of cases, it's easier to maintain connection with people when you're empathetic, and it's easier to snowball relationships, but it's harder to open. So I have a very easy time maintaining relationships and growing them, and building trust and all that. But connect with people and even the energetic part of maintaining relationships, I'm not that great with, depending. right? I don't do a lot of, like, I do a certain amount, but I don't do a lot of, like, proactively just reaching out and talking to people and keeping up with them. Not as much as a natural connector might be, right? And so in my case, Mike, for example, often has more energy for doing that. And that'll benefit me because it'll kind of reflect on me. We'll kind of, we kind of come as a package in a lot of cases, and so I kind of get the effect of that. And then there's other times when it's great for me to be dealing with the person for my strengths. And this is where I talked about 2 or 3 webinars ago. I said if you don't value someone else's strengths when they're not there, then they're not going to be there when you need them. So let's say you are lucky like me and you have a partner somewhat like Mike, right? Not that there's anybody like Mike. I think he's listening. But you understand what I mean, right? Generally, who is better with opening people and connecting with people and connecting people to each other. That's what a connector does. It's not just connecting people to themselves, but they also connect them and have a group. Then there's going to be times when my gift shines, right? Where I figure out what someone's thinking, there's a misunderstanding, I iron it out, etc. Right? In getting clear about an offer and a deal, getting clarity, I'm good with that. At those moments, and if Mike's strength isn't showing at that moment, then what a lot of people do naturally to some degree, but this adds up, it's like this constant ding, is they kind of feel like puffed up and valuable themselves and like the other person is less valuable, and they'll kind of talk and act that way a little bit, right? Especially sometimes naturally in life, this can continue for a month or 2 or 3, or there can be a big important event where your strength is big and theirs doesn't matter, or they even made a mistake that caused an issue because where they're focused in one place and not somewhere else. If you remember to value connectors and openers even when they're not doing what they're doing or even when it's not apparent, then their strength will be there for you when you need it, right? But it's very natural and easy to have that value be reduced. And I've watched people do this. I've watched people do this to Mike very consistently because Mike will set people up, connect them, and then it seems natural to people to cut Mike out, right, in a lot of cases, and they feel like they don't need him anymore. But there is then I also observe as the months go by, there are plenty of times that the amount of vectors, eyeballs, traffic, right, to that person diminishes naturally, just as it does for everybody. And then they sure as heck, if they were smart, they would have kept things up more properly with Mike, right? But I was smart enough to do that, and now I have what I have, right? And everything I have came in business-wise. Came from Mike. And even when I needed something critical, because my wife was born in Russia, she needed to, we needed to have some government document sign off from somebody about how to do, it's called sponsorship, for her to become a citizen because I couldn't show enough income for the previous 3 years. Like if you were a student or an entrepreneur, it's basically impossible. And so she couldn't even come here. She was going to be blocked. And it was through Mike that I found somebody to do that, right? So even my marriage. And many of my friends and so forth. But what I'm trying to say, let me think here. But I realized that. I'm very aware, and I maintain my awareness that everything I had originated, or everything, again, within a lot of what I have, but the overwhelming amount of what I have originated with Mike opening and connecting, right? At this point, it would certainly my finances in life would diminish just like everyone else without Mike. But at this point, he gives people enough of a lift off just naturally by what he does that they can look like they're doing fine without him for a while, right? Of course, personally, I want him in my life regardless. But just I've watched people business-wise not value it properly, and the difference is massive. And then I value it properly, and I have what I have. I haven't had to do that, but I did what I'm suggesting you guys do. And you get the same benefit in general. There's plenty of people that do something relatively similar, right? I'm not saying in degree or comparing them with Mike, but this, general type of thing. Obviously, people can succeed in business and get clients without specifically working with the same person that I specifically work with. But this is amazingly universal when I watch it, how people don't value connectors. And it's not only with Mike. I see it with other connectors, and I see people just not value it. And it's easy to track the logic of why they don't, right? They already got introduced to people. They already got things opened. And then why do they need it? But then, like with anyone, If we don't value the strength when we don't need it, we won't have it when we do. Okay, so that is my spiel on that. Excellent. If I do say so myself. And the next thing is, I wrote here, build, and this is a different, of course, same overall topic of getting vector leads, but a different subtopic. Build more contextualized shingles, and remember vectors. Okay, so a shingle is like you hang a shingle. It's not a shingle on a roof. It's the idea, or it might literally come from that, but you, like, it's the idea from in the past. Of course, the world is different now, in many cases, whatever. But you, a doctor or a psychiatrist or whoever, chiropractor, has their place and they have a shingle out that says, I'm a dentist or chiropractor or whatever. And what does that do? And I'm using the word metaphorically. But however, somewhat metaphorically. But anything that kind of hangs out there, a great modern illustration, that still exists, what I just told you. Obviously, people have signs above a brick and mortar building still sometimes. I'm not suggesting that for you unless you want that. But when people do web design and they put, like, this website is designed by such and such, and they'll manage to get that on the site, right? And it'll just sit there on the person's site, advertising their web design. So that's a great example of a shingle. A business card, sort of, right? But in many cases, they're not going to be looked at much again. If you could tack your business card into someone's, like, house right above their computer, then that would be a particular example of a shingle. But what I did, I supported myself by putting up flyers, paper flyers, during my 20s. I wasn't rich, but I had a great financial situation in the sense that I just put up flyers on the University of Virginia campus for information sessions, right, sales presentations for my accelerated learning course. And then I would do that like in early September, and then people would come to the information sessions, I'd sell them, I'd get roughly 50 students, make about $10,000 or so, and do it in September, October, and November, and that would support me for basically the year. And then I could repeat it in the spring to some degree, sometimes depending on what I was doing. It wasn't quite as many people in the spring. Because then they would learn the ability kind of a little too late, and then the summer would be coming, and they wouldn't be as motivated in the spring. So those flyers were like shingles, right? They're out there. The point of a shingle is, of course, if you pay for like a banner ad, then that would be similar, but you're paying for it. But the nice thing is, if it's hanging out there somewhere, where it can attract people with the right vector at the right time, right? A shingle is different from having to, like, cold call or do something that is where you're initiating a contact a little bit without the person. A shingle gets someone to initiate contact with you, right? It's like a communication that sits there that you're not overtly doing, and it gets them to initiate contact. Now, in terms of flyers, believe it or not, I personally, if I was doing any kind of consulting with web traffic, at least when I was getting started, obviously I might snowball to a point where I wouldn't need to do this, but I would put up flyers. Of course, like, hundreds of people have been successful without doing this, but plenty of people want more traffic methods. So take this for what it is, but I would do this. Is I would put up flyers, and I would just find a way to contextualize it and make it natural, and I would, in addition to whatever I wanted to say on my flyer about what I did in my local town, right, and put it up in a few good places or several good places, I would put like an asterisk or something and saying, if I'm digital marketing consultant, why am I putting up paper flyers? Simple reason, it works to do both, right? And then that just kind of answers the objection. Depending on the type of shingle, you might, and that's an example there of what I'm about to say, this is kind of analogous to if you ever increase your prices or decrease them, and to a customer base or a prospect base that already knows your previous prices, then, like, if someone ever sees you reducing or increasing your price, then you need to have a reason for it. right? You can't just decrease the price for no reason. People will figure there's something wrong with the product or less valuable than the product, right? Plus existing customers might complain too. But separate from that, it'll hurt your conversion. If you decrease the price of something, you can actually make less sales in a lot of cases, depending on the product, but you can make less sales if you don't justify it properly, make it look natural and use it as, make sure it's framed as a plus. So same thing with certain shingles, even if you're advertising on some kind of Facebook thing or wherever you might be doing, you want to have a way to frame things so that the fact that you're putting up an ad is like a positive. It basically increases your value. The way I framed it with the flyer did that, right? Like when I said you might ask people, if you're wondering why I put up paper flyers when I am a digital agency, it's because both work, right? Then you turned it into a demonstration of higher value, right? You increased your value by framing it properly. So just whatever kind of shingle, and once this is about getting you to ask the right question, right? I gave you a number of examples. Flyers, an actual shingle outside of a brick and mortar place, could have something on your car. But then again, you have to think, do I want to look like the good humor man, right? Like the ice cream man or whatever, or not? For certain types of things, it can look totally reasonable, but contextualize it properly. And just something like, if I'm a digital agency, why am I advertising conventionally? Because both work. Or you could say because both work, and I recommend you do both. You know, the phrase "I recommend" probably is the kind of thing an expert would say, and it probably makes you look good. Any kind of conversion stuff is contextual overall, where there's no phrase that always works with sales, just depending on the audience and the time period and the environment and all that. But when you ask the right questions, you'll find the right answers, especially a little bit of testing and just getting feedback and so forth. And I personally do, this is a conversion statement, but for what I do very little testing. I can just kind of eyeball feedback and sales numbers pretty easily to see if something's generally working or not. I don't do a lot of optimization with the type of products and business models that I do. Whereas for some business models, it's very valid to do optimization, like split testing and so forth. So yeah, the more you can think of shingles. Oh, Mike Long was very smart with this. He made originally early on while I was doing my accelerated learning, he made a game store, a brick and mortar store before the internet was big or while it was starting to get big. But then he also put cards on eBay, and he would find ways to make things that people would use as part of playing the game Magic. So it was this collectible card game, and he would sell game pieces for that, the cards. And when people are playing Magic, they might want certain representations called tokens that are not the same as Magic cards, but they're used in play, just like dice might be used a little bit in play. And so he would make some of those. Instead of making just a business card, he would make things that people would naturally want to use and keep around, and then he would put his website on it, right? And so that's a shingle, you see, because it's something obviously that and it's smarter than a business card is kind of often the lamest type of shingle, right? Now you can certainly turn them to your advantage if you can be clever or smart enough with them, and they're cheap enough that getting them printed out. I've never personally ever made business cards, but they're not necessarily wrong at all. But thinking like that, like Mike did, and like the other examples I've given you, where on a website can be about web design or anything else. Of course, your web, any kind of web page, social media pages, YouTube videos and pages, and your own website, those are obviously shingles, right? And if you can get them placed in the search engines where people will notice, then that's pretty optimal. And of course, you'll learn to do that in OMG. But then the more you think overall about shingles, the better. And so you can, when you see it that way, then you can value having online shingles more and offline shingles where appropriate. But it's great because it gets the vector. You really want people to initiate the contact. It's better. It doesn't mean you can't build an entire business by you initiating contact. And there's very effective strategies with you initiating contact. But even when you're doing initiating contact, typically you're doing it in a place where people are ready for that to happen. So LinkedIn is an obvious example of that. Another is with online dating. I needed to have prospects for that back when I was dating, right? I figured out dating in particular and what I wanted. I figured out kind of dating and relationships and focused on it for about 6 months, met my wife, and have lived happily ever after for the next 12 years plus, right? And part of that was online dating had just started, and it was unbelievable, right? And here was a place where you could initiate contact, but it was in a place where people were ready for that to happen. And so any place you go where initiating contact is natural, again, this natural versus unnatural distinction is critical as one of the categories you need to stay within when you're doing traffic and conversion. Even relevant with product, you want to just pay attention to various important categories that people think in terms of. And that'll be, I think, what I'll talk about in the next webinar, either the next one or the one after. But so you can initiate contact if you get yourself in the right environment for it. Even then, valuing connectors and openers. In that case, though, in essence, the dating website is like a connector. And now it's caught on, but I spotted it right away. When I did online dating, it was pretty new. There were still like articles written about it, like it was a novelty. And yeah, there's actually some people doing this, and people are still asking, oh my gosh, does that really work, right? And I met someone just so terrific for me that way. And pretty quickly. And it wasn't the first person I met. I met many people, but then that enabled me to meet someone great. And it was so much more effective and efficient than trying to meet people in real life, so to speak, locally, especially once you're out of college. So you could think the same way regarding business is my point. Value environments that allow you to initiate contact 3 times more than you might already value them. Right, because they're like connectors. And they kind of do the opening for you. Right, think about it. The people are already sort of opened, like in terms of socially opened, where the ice is broken, just by the fact that they, like the website, or like the dating website or the event did it for you. Now, in terms of this final line is a somewhat different subtopic, but it'll relate to what I just said about events. The final thing I want you to value, perhaps more than you already do, is the ability to ping prospects, okay? What that means is where you send them a communication, an email, a phone call, text message, or whatever, and that's natural and basically fine with them, all right? They may or may not respond, but it's fine and natural. That ability to ping people and have it be fine and natural, possible, first of all, for it to be possible, and then for it to be fine and natural. Another example of pinging people is retargeting, right, which is Joe teaches about that in some of our programs. And I think he'll even put it in Spec Ops, but we'll see. And Liz might actually talk about it too, potentially with Amazon. But what that does, if someone visits one of your web presences and you have to join a service, like you have to qualify and join a service that allows you to do it, and you get a code from in that place online, and then you put it on your web property, whatever it might be, and it leaves a cookie on their computer, and then you can run, like ad choices and stuff can pop up for those people if you want. So you can ping them again through paying a little bit for ads. But it's targeted, right? And they've already visited you in some way. So anything that lets you reach out and ping people, and email is the prime example. It's where I've made pretty much all my money, is through email marketing. And ping is, again, it's re-pinging. Right? When I email people, I don't value the ability to spam people who've never met me. I'm talking about that I can reach out. That's the trouble with business cards and some things, is I can reach out, and it's the problem with just having someone's phone number that you met once at a meeting. You can call them, but it's still Well, also it depends on how you frame things. One of the things that can help you ping somebody with a text message is if you ask them if you can and give them a reason, right? So part of pinging is having the right permission to do so, which you can only do when you're talking to somebody in some way, communicating in some way. And other than retargeting, but that's okay because it's just showing an ad where they would normally see an ad, so it's natural that way. But anything that lets you realistically ping people, which you might have to plan in advance, is my point, right? If you don't ask them for the right permission and frame it the right way when you're talking to them in person, then pinging them through a text or a phone call might not work very well, and you might not really be able to, even if you physically can by having their number. They're not going to, if they don't take it very well or they won't answer, then in essence you can't ping them, right? So you had to plan in advance in those cases. But you want to value that greatly. And again, maybe about 3 times more than you already do. So you put more resources into it. Instead of just getting someone's number, theoretically, you can frame it about pinging them. And then I said I would relate this to events. And this is a very important thing, is that really there's no good way to ping someone without an event attached. So really the whole secret to re-pinging, I could have put re-ping people instead of just ping. Stick that in there. The whole secret to being able to re-ping people is events. And so you need to develop your event toolbox as part of your offer toolbox. And an event could be just a meeting at a certain time at a Starbucks, or at a restaurant that's appropriate for that type of thing, or in somewhere else, in a place where it's neither a restaurant, it's just a place where you can just meet in some way, a college classroom or an open common room that is nearby that you know is going to be open, whatever. That suggestion isn't going to work for a lot of people, but just to give you a sense of what I mean. And if it's going to be small at first, then you just frame it that way. You just don't act like it's going to be huge, and you don't have too many chairs available. And like if it's going to be small and you meet at Starbucks, well, Starbucks tables are naturally limited to like 4 people, so it seems normal if 2 people show up, right? But you want to think in terms of events, because events let you re-ping people. And some people say, well, I don't know what to send in an email. I want to email people I have on my email list. Or in many more cases, people don't have an email list because they can't see what to do with it. And they don't see the value in re-pinging people enough, right? They think, oh yeah, that would be nice in theory, but they don't value it enough to put their limited resources into it. But being able to re-ping people is massively important for traffic. It's free traffic with a decent vector, right? It's unbelievable, right? Because I have an email list as part of my business, I have it with other people. I don't mean that I personally own it exclusively, but because OMG has an email list, then that gives us a tremendously valuable resource, obviously. And so before I had a big email list, before I did any of this, over 10 years ago, I had a little email list. I spoke at an event 2 years in a row in the North Carolina Association for Gifted and Talented Teachers. I was invited to just be one of the speakers. I wasn't like the headline speaker or anything, but over 100 teachers showed up, and I said I would give them a summary of what I would talk about, and got their emails on a pad, and then entered them in. This is over 10 years ago, And before that, when I was advertising accelerated learning, I would do events. The sales presentation, I would say, don't worry about remembering everything that I talked to you about, because I would give some training and an explanation of stuff, and also when it would start and so forth. And this is before there was a lot of internet stuff. There was email, but there wasn't a lot of having your own website at that time. I didn't have my own website for years but before I had email, but not my own website for some number of years. I'm not recommending that. It was just my own ignorance combined with the internet was in its infancy. But I had email, and so I just collected their emails on a pad because I said, and I put it in the following way. I said, don't worry about remembering everything. Just enjoy the presentation, and I'll email you a summary of what I talked about, so that to have afterwards. And so I presented it like, don't worry, and it was valuable. And then I passed around a pad, and everyone gave me their email right at that time. And then I just entered them myself, and then let me re-ping them naturally with a summary. And then it was natural to re-ping them because when the course was starting, where they had to show up and pay me then, or they would give me a little deposit first, and then I could tell them about that. And then when the course was starting and they have to show up. It's all event-based, right? The sales presentation is an event. Sending them a summary is an event. An event doesn't have to be a real-life event. It can be giving them something. It can be, and these days it can be a webinar, and people often don't know how many other people are on a webinar. You can do a webinar for one person and act like there's 100 people on it if you want, right? But there has to be some event. And it's better to think in terms of an event than just giving them something. That's a little nebulous. Think in terms of an event. An event is very different because if you just give somebody something, they might not value it. If you give someone something for free, how much is it worth? Nothing, right? I mean, by definition, by logic. If it has like a real intrinsic value, because if I give them a shoe that they know sells for a certain amount, or two shoes, presumably a pair of shoes that sells for a certain amount, and they know that they're not defective, then that has a certain value. But if you, in a lot of cases, you give them something for free, like a free webinar or free this or free that, then it might not have a lot of intrinsic value. But events are different. An event is different than just like a product. A summary of what was talked about in an event, you see that's a little bit different. A transcript of a webinar is a bit different. You can give just a resource like an ebook away for free, and it can have some value if you build up the value, of course, if you describe the value. So I'm not saying that nothing but an event has value. But if you want to know how to re-ping people, at least start thinking in terms of an event. Secondarily, and then it's good enough. An event, if you're giving them something, you can think of that as you're giving them something as an event. One way or the other, I think you can get the idea. But the more you think in terms of events, the more you think in terms of what makes an event seem valuable, and then what makes an event actually be valuable, right? So it's not just they think it's going to be valuable, and they show up and they don't feel like it was valuable, or they feel like it was, but then they end up not really getting anything particularly valuable out of it. So the more you think in terms of events and value, and you'll just naturally practice by starting and doing something with it. You'll develop practice letting people know about the event and seeing how that goes. And then you'll feel more incentive for getting the ability to re-ping people, getting their email, or setting up retargeting, or getting phone numbers to text them about an event, right? And that sort of thing. So there you go, events and re-pinging people and building on that. And that this all has to do with traffic, right? If you can re-ping people, that's leads, that's traffic. When we get free vectored eyeballs, so to speak, you can call them vectored eyeballs if you want, by sending out an email, right? So that's free traffic. We don't just have to count on new traffic coming in. If people open up our emails, that's traffic in the way that I'm talking about it. And one of the best sources of traffic is re-pinging people, not just only getting new leads. And of course, the sale is often made on like the 10th or 12th contact, not the first. So again, if you can't re-ping people, then you're having a significant problem. And without events, you have difficulty re-pinging people. And a lot of people just don't realize that. You don't have to worry about saying something clever in your emails or your re-pinging. The cleverness is because people don't realize about events. If you have an event, you don't need to say something clever. You just explain the event in an excited way, right? And of course, that will naturally lead you to point out some benefits to the event and so forth. But it becomes pretty much more of a no-brainer and much more of something that a novice can do if you're sending an email about an event. And then you just develop your experience, and you're naturally developing your offer toolbox by doing all of this, right? The more you hold events, the more you tell people about them, the more that all becomes part of your offer toolbox and your offer toolbox method for building your offer toolbox. You'll understand your method better for building your offer toolbox. Okay, most excellent. About the right time frame too for the monologue portion of the show, and now we will talk to each other a bit. We're talking in the OMG way. I will do a quick little, I'm going to turn my screen just for 1 second and do a quick check if anyone needs to come into OMG way. and then we'll do a little bit of discussion. Yep, good thing I checked. All right. And then screen back on. All right, here we go. All right, I'll scroll. Bryce wrote, I might scroll to the bottom in a second, but Bryce wrote, David, going back to the idea of anti-fragile, this allowed me to relate to my strength of materials class. He's doing, I believe, engineering, or where we learned about how materials must go through a process of stress and strain so they don't fail when made. Right, excellent, exactly. Joseph liked that class too. Super. Yeah, the anti-fragile idea is terrific, and there's an author who wrote a book. He also wrote Black Swan, and I'll look up his name maybe for the next webinar. And Bryce wrote, going back to offer, I was looking at the customers I have as a sales rep, and I thought of using the mobile friendly fix as a gateway for doing SEO. Many of my potential and actual customers are manufacturing companies. Would it make sense to do them a second service by doing SEO? For the most part, they do seem okay in terms of traffic, but they've actually not mentioned that to me. Some of these would be maybe better. This might be a better question to ask the other coach to do this specifically. But let me see if I can give you a decent answer here. Bryce said, I work with a machine shop that distributes screw machine and CNC parts. Wouldn't it make sense to first offer supplied parts before I offer to do SEO services to them? Probably. It depends what they expect. The rule of thumb is that things should look natural, and you should look like you're on their side and so forth. It's interesting, a little bit more of a conversion question now that I think about it than a lead question, right? You already have the leads. You know who they are. But another thing you can do is hold an event, and the event gives you an excuse to say, hey, I just want you to know I also do SEO, and or you know, I work with web traffic, and you can again kind of explain it naturally. I'm not saying this is true whatsoever, but you can say, like, I'm a bit of a nerd. I'm focused on science and math, technology, and so forth, and then it's my own kind of passion. I've just naturally developed the ability to get web traffic and rank people on Google, and I'm holding an event specifically for machine shop owners or that kind of thing, and talking about getting web traffic for them, right? And it could be a webinar, right, that you do. You could do it like a YouTube live hangout or that sort of thing. Although then they can see how many people are watching on that. But you can sign up for GoToWebinar, and you can do it that way. So an event can really help you. I'll refresh this, obviously. Okay, let me pop down here. Let me see. I know I skipped over some things. Rick wrote, I like this idea of shingles, something beyond a frig magnet or calendar. Oh, a refrigerator magnet, right, or a calendar. Oh, and there's nothing wrong with those, by the way. Those are little shingles, too, if people put them up. We'll have to develop this idea. Would you consider a happy client selling referral? Ah, right, I didn't really get into referrals, interestingly enough. Okay, so now I'm glad you reminded me. So regarding referrals, a couple of things. Referrals and testimonials, one of the most interesting things with them is that you really have to ask, and you have to make it easy. Give them a template for them to for people to either provide testimonials or referrals. And the more they see other people doing it, which of course takes some kindling, because before you start, other people haven't done it, but realize that putting a lot into getting the first few testimonials and the first few referrals is worth it, because it's much easier to get referrals once you've already gotten some, even from different people, because you can drop the fact that, oh yeah, like a lot of my business is referral these days, and the more you frame things where it's normal to give you testimonials and referrals, and the more you deal with people one-on-one and keep them, the more you're transparent and that sort of thing. when you're starting out, you're going to naturally give more attention to your clients, and that's not really bad because it can lead to referrals better, because the more interaction you have, the more personal things are. OMG testimonials are, even though we have hundreds, they're so often come from one-on-one interactions, and the fact that we do our own customer service. So a lot of testimonial, of course, and then we do Facebook, which is Facebook groups, which are personal, and there's a lot of personal answering. I bet most everyone that's left an earnings report or any kind of testimonial, previous to that, they've had a specific question answered at some point, right, where it's personal. Very rare that people give testimonials if they haven't had some personal interaction first with, especially the principles of a business, right? And then I get so many comments about Alchemy, for example, when it's like help with a password or something, and then someone says, by the way, I love Alchemy, and here's something I haven't told you about that, that sort of thing. Let's see what else with referrals. So basically one-on-one interaction, transparency, mind reading, but not like cold mind reading and not assuming you know what someone's thinking, but putting yourself in their position and kind of meeting a couple of extra needs they might not have realized they had. Again, that seems natural. You don't want to go too much overboard in a way that feels unnatural, that can look desperate. And then if you ask for referrals, you don't necessarily need to compensate somebody. But the more that, anytime you're compensating someone with money or otherwise, the more natural it seems, the better. And so what you might do is offer them some additional services or keywords or additional web page or additional social media type of thing, like specific thing, like I don't use many, so they don't pop to my mind, but just something like Twitter, like setting up a Twitter account for them, that they might have that, but like a more kind of lesser known one that you deal with, and that Cotton showing and such. You can like add that on. You can say when someone does a referral, I set up this extra thing, and it might be something that you only do for people that give referrals. And that seems natural, right? Sometimes if you pay people for referrals, it can have a bit of a drawback, but you could give a bit of a discount, which feels a little bit different. But again, you can give an additional service. And then let them know you appreciate it. People are generally motivated about 50-50 for kind of like pride in their work, and the other 50 is an actual reward that feels natural. Unnatural rewards feel manipulative. And whether something's natural or not is and what I'm telling you about this natural versus unnatural is really a pretty rare thing for people to understand, and it's pretty great. So make sure you use it and think about it. But natural or unnatural is relative to the listener, relative to the observer. So it's not whether you think it is, although you can guess pretty well, right? And usually if you make an effort for something to appear natural, you'll usually manage to do it. But people like to be compensated with some actual reward, but it has to feel natural, or else it'll feel manipulative. And like, for example, you can compensate someone financially for a referral, but what I do, if I do that, is I make it feel natural by saying, look, I spend money on advertising anyway. This saves me money in advertising, and I pass that along to you. And that's why I give some money for a referral. See, and that natural versus unnatural distinction makes all the difference with people. People like to be naturally compensated. They actually dislike being unnaturally compensated unless they're really desperate. If someone's desperate for money, then they'll take what they can get. Otherwise, people also like, though, 50-50 to feel pride in their work, and their work is in this case is the referral. If you let them know how you really appreciate the referral, and not just like kind of more than just the first initial thanks. I'd probably mention it again, and including a little like update on how you're using it. Just like if you get a gift for Christmas, it's nice to say thank you when you get it, but if you're smart, you also say thank you a second time along with, and I've been using that bike, I ride my bike several times a week. or now I use it to go to the store, and I used to have to walk, and I like riding a lot better, and I can carry more stuff back, right? So when you're thanking them a second time about the referral, then you explain how you use it, right? When I thank you guys for these webinars, for participating in the webinar, I don't just say thank you, everybody, goodbye. I say thank you, and here's how it helps me. You see, then you can kind of feel, but it's natural and true, right? It's just more effective for everyone. Everyone's better off. You understand how it helps me even better, and because it helps get ideas out of me, like with this question, with the referrals. I probably wouldn't have gotten to it, and I actually meant to at one point when I was preparing. But then people are more motivated. People like to have pride in what they do, plus a reward. In the case of asking questions, the reward is getting more information and more your actual answer to your question. Thank you, Susanna. I'm glad. So many interesting points. Joseph Baffy, shingle equals USB drive, notepad, pen, coffee cup. Do you think these are still valid today? Yeah, those are all totally valid if you give things away to the right people. Absolutely. Right, like I talked about with Mike, where things people will actually use, right, where they used in Magic in that case, and they were very cheap for him to do. But they were really clever, because people literally, there could be a card in Magic where you summon 2 spiders, let's say. And in most cases, you just put the card down, and it's like 1 spider. But let's say there's a card where it's like 2 spider tokens. There's no actual spider tokens that are physical. It's just a theoretical thing. So people would just rip off a little piece of paper and put it there. It's much cooler to have an actual real card size thing with a picture of a spider on it. And people wouldn't have that, and Mike would give it to him, and then it would have his website in the back. So yeah, thinking about stuff like that. But also, was that natural? Very natural. You see, they really needed it. They really wanted to use it. It was genuinely cool. So when you're thinking of these little giveaways, then as long as it's reasonably natural. And even why, you could say, because I'm kind of in the know and connected technically with technology, then I can get these USB drives. It's quite a high quality drive. It won't go bad on you, most likely, but I get them for pretty cheap. So it's pretty efficient for me to give you one, and here you go. Makes it more natural, and reminds them of how you're valuable. You have connections with technology. You have connections and knowledge when it comes to technology. Not that you do, but if you do, then say it. If you don't, then you don't have to use that. But think of ways to frame, right? When you give away something, frame it so you increase the value of the product and yourself in a way that's natural, if possible. If you can't think of something, you can't think of it. But if you ask a way to think naturally, to frame something naturally, you'll think of something reasonable. And you don't have to start making up a bunch of lies that might sound good if they were true, but if they're not true, it's hard to remember your lies. Lies are hard to remember. That's one of my mottos. Great. Yeah, we need to get into more retargeting, right? Yeah, and we just a lot of what I was telling you today is like the slider bar and how much you value something. I'm telling you this is worth probably more resource than you might have been putting into it, or higher on the priority level than you might have been putting into it, and why. Faith wrote, valuing connectors is so key. I can see how I have not been valuing certain people enough in my life, and I'm thinking of ways I can bring them more value. Killer, that's awesome. Yeah, it's so natural not to value them enough. People will value them to some degree, but not nearly enough. And I realized that and valued them enough, and it was significantly more than default, and it's really gotten me far. Plus, it's fair. It's kind of unfair. Connectors, they provide so much value, and then people forget because they provide it up front, and then it's got, then it's done with, and so it's not nice for them either. So I'm affirmative action for connectors here as well. Cynthia wrote, ping and retargeting. I have so many followers on LinkedIn, and I have no idea how to ping them. I'll have to figure this out. Wonderful. Beautiful. So exactly right. Just even asking the question of how do I ping? How do I figure it out? Sometimes you have to set it up in advance and so forth. And now you value it properly, right? What's the point if you can't ping them? And if you can't ping them effectively, which part of that is not just technology, part of it's tech, and part of it's framing. And part of it's framing that can only be done up front. And part of it is realizing about events. And events, I use that in a very broad way. If you're wondering if something's an event, sure, it's an event. Okay, ping them about it, And unless you feel like you can think, all right, if I'm one of my pingees and I got pinged about this, would I appreciate it to some degree, or would I reasonably appreciate it? But make sure you get yourself in the mind of remember, when you first try to imagine being someone else, you screw it up. Go back to, if you have access to it already, go to Alchemy 20, and I talk about mind reading. But it's really kind of perspective creating, right? Creating the other person's, building the other person's kind of perspective and so forth. Or almost building kind of where they're standing from and then standing from there. Repping, excellent. You feel like you're in tune with me here. I think that's what that means. Bryn says, wow, David, the OMG email list is full of events. You guys explaining what went on, pinging. Absolutely. Yep, no accident, and it's very intentional. Everything's designed around events. Nassim Nicholas Taylor, thank you very much. That's who wrote Anti-Fragile, is what Christos is referring to here. So he wrote Black Swan, that got him kind of famous, or that was his kind of breakthrough book, and then he wrote a book called Anti-Fragile. And if you'd like to read it, great. And I recommend it, if you have infinite resources and if you have infinite time, then read it. Or if you have extra time and you don't know what else to read, then it's perfectly a nice book. I enjoy reading it. Joy Incorporated, I would say, is a priority. Although really Anti-Fragile is a terrific book. Could be a high priority. Susanna, these are excellent explanations. I've heard it said differently by so many marketers before, but the way you describe it makes it much easier to grasp. Most likely also thanks to having attended previous alchemy sessions. Now I'm inspired to create events. Wonderful. That's terrific. Yeah, I get that sort of thing. Even back when I was doing accelerated learning, there's a way that I kind of develop a sort of proof of things and help people understand things, or at least try to, that I'm really geared toward getting a result for you guys as opposed to appearing clever for myself. And that goes along with what I've talked about in alchemy, and that's real. I gear my presentation and even my understanding, my preparation towards thinking how to explain something, to understand it myself, and then explain it in a way where you'll actually want to do it, not just kind of make you feel emotionally excited right now, because that'll fade, but to really see also how the opposite doesn't make sense, and so on and so forth. And I frame it in terms of priorities, not just saying this is, when you start trying to appear clever, you start making these checklists, and you don't frame them in terms of alternative use of resources, right? Think about it. If I was teaching you and I was saying this is good, that's good. That's why I said it the way I did about Anti-Fragile. If you have infinite resources, I wasn't trying to explain how much of a priority it should be, because I don't know for you. And so a checklist that makes me clever would have 3 times as many things on there, you see? But that would actually be negative in value for you compared to this presentation. Because this is about trying to help you see what genuinely is more important and valuable and where you genuinely want to put your resources. Chris wrote, great stuff, Davey. Great to articulate and acknowledge connectors and openers, whether in others or ourselves. Now that I can see it better, I'll be able to refine. Absolutely. Exactly. Wonderful. Jennifer wrote, thanks, David. This explains a lot about how we're programmed into the fight, flight, habitual state. Oh, yeah, I didn't get too much into that, and I won't necessarily get much more into it now. But we really have a hard time. Like, we can see this slide here that I have with the toolbox, like building your offer toolbox, building your correct ideas and your model for the world, not just reinforcing that the one you already have is all correct and defending it. When we're in fight or flight, we won't do that. Right? It won't feel right, and our brain will really actively, our mind will really make us feel like we don't want to do that strongly. It'll make it seem ridiculous. So we really need to take a deep breath. If you are in fight or flight, then just focus. It's okay. It's one target, one active goal. Get out of fight or flight. And I don't mean you flee. You can't flee out of fight or flight mode. If you are desperate for money, then focus on getting undesperate. And that's your one thing that you're working on. Don't focus on getting comfortable or rich or what you feel like doing or entertaining yourself or your social life. Just focus on getting to a stable position financially. And a lot of that is going to involve spending less money. And that should be your only goal, is you want to get out of fight or flight by having a simple, stable foundation for yourself. Generally, that's with money. You don't really need to be in fight or flight with something other than money. as far as I can tell. And so don't be in fight or flight mode at all with social stuff or relationships or family stuff, unless someone's physically attacking you, in which case then you just, do your best to get away from that person or deal with that somehow. So if it's like you're being physically attacked regularly in your environment, then get out, do whatever you have to do to get out of it. And that might relate to money, once again, right? And being able to support yourself. But so basically it really comes down to, can you support yourself financially with a certain quarantined amount of work that you're doing, a job or whatever you have to do to upkeep that. And then realize, okay, that's taken care of. I might still have to show up at my job, but it's quarantined, it's in a box, it's understood, and when I'm in my job, I can handle that, so I'm not in fight or flight there, I'm just taking care of it. I'm maintaining my stable base. And then anything outside of that, whoa, if I feel like it's fight or flight, I'm just projecting. It's just habitual neurons firing off and framing that I'm projecting onto a situation. If you're not in immediate danger of starvation or death by elements, right, because you don't have a roof over your head, then why are you in fight or flight mode? Just stop and say, wait, why am I? Unless it's real and you're desperate, in which case, just take care of that. That's your one goal. You just deal with that. Whenever you're just dealing with one thing, you can do it well, and you can do it quickly. And that simplifies life. And then once you're out of fight or flight mode, then you're not in a rush. Oh, I wanted to say, if you're in a rush, then you're in fight or flight mode. If you have a commitment where there's a bit of pressure to perform, if you have a performance, that doesn't mean you're necessarily in fight or flight mode. So this webinar, I had to show up for the webinar, and there could be some pressure, right? I should do a decent job with it. And at some point, I no longer have any more time, right? I'm out of time, the webinar started. That's okay. If there's a performance, there's going to be some pressure attached to that. If you're meeting someone for lunch, then it's not like a performance on a major scale, but it's a commitment. You have to meet them. There can be some amount of rush too, if you didn't prepare, to try to get there on time. Next time, try to prepare a little bit better, right? So if there's a performance or a commitment and there's a little bit of pressure, that doesn't mean you're in fight or flight mode, although still, if you find yourself rushing for those things, then prepare better next time. Otherwise, if you're rushing without like a clear performance coming up, then and remember, even with a performance, generally preparation can avoid much of a feeling of rush. And try to work that in. And next time, make your agreements so that you don't need to rush, right? So prepare when you're making the commitment or agreement and agreeing on a performance, and then prepare after you make the agreement, prepare for the performance properly and ahead of time so you don't have to rush. And then otherwise in life, if you feel like there's a rush when there's not, if you feel like there's a rush and you don't have an urgent financial situation or something like that, a bear's not chasing you, then you're just projecting fight or flight mode, and that will keep you thinking terribly and defensively, and it will keep you from thinking about your toolbox for life with your ideas and model for life, or specifically with business and monetization with your offer toolbox. And it'll certainly keep you from thinking about the method. While you're building your toolbox, you can also reflect on the method of building it, including, I started to talk about this and I don't think I finished this thread before. There's the anti-fragile idea of you get battered around and you get better from that. But then there's the idea, and I referred to this in the past, but I just want to reinforce this, of when something goes well, you do a good elevator pitch, you do a good sales presentation, or you provide a good product or service or whatever. You have a great phone call with someone. It goes well. That is worth reflecting on too. You don't just want to be anti-fragile in the way of getting battered around, but you want to be you want to benefit from success. Typically, people will often get a mixed benefits and drawbacks from success. The benefit of the success is they get kind of a building block, or the reward, if you have a good sales presentation, then you might get a client, right? Presumably you got a client from it. But then they'll have a drawback in that they get cocky and overconfident and want to stop thinking about their toolbox and go here. Because people, again, it's like you're gravitating. It's like people have a goal to be in fight or flight mode or something, or just it's their natural default. They don't have a goal, but people have these meta goals, like I talk about, these meta currents that pull on your goals themselves, your self-image, your core model for how the world is, and your norms and standards. And if it feels normal to be in fight or flight mode, relatively speaking, then when you have a success, you're like, oh good, I can stop trying to understand. Oh good, I can stop trying to build and understand, build my toolbox, understand my method, and I can just be on the surface here, fight or flight. I can look out for danger better when I'm looking at the surface. You're not really on the lookout for danger here, right? You have to take your eye off your immediate surroundings and your immediate opportunities. You're like your food, right? Like if you're hunting and gathering or whatever, you're like a deer or a sheep or even a wolf or whatever. Then this fighter, it's like fight, flight, or feeding, I could put. And feeding is like opportunity, you see? So people say, oh, I'm not in fight or flight, but if you're in feeding mode, where opportunities are like urgent and a rush, and you just want to look out for them and you don't want to miss an opportunity, then you're in this, and this relates to that, I think it's the beta state. I got them mixed up in one webinar, but then we looked them up and so forth. But where you're like in full waking mode, as opposed to alpha, where you're more relaxed and internally focused. It all relates to this fight, flight, or feeding, or sex, right? Same thing, you spot a attractive member of the opposite sex. It's all the same mode, right? They call it the 4 Fs, this little joke in psychobiology, right? They teach you if you take that course in school with your amygdala and whatever the heck. Reptile brain, they call it, and so forth. But you need to get out of all these modes in order to build. You can't build in these modes, but people think they should be in these modes because they feel like they'll lose an opportunity for sex or feeding or making money, or a predator's going to come they have to run from, or they have to fight intuitively. And this is a norm or standard that's beneath the surface that you're not aware of. It affects your goals. You're aware of like your surface kind of goals and feelings. You're not generally aware, except by logic, if you stop and figure it out, like I've done and that I've explained to you now, about how these norms and standards act as super goals, meta goals, or whatever, that pull on your goals and frame them and put them in a box. And again, you can affirm intellectually, oh yeah, I'm a guy who builds, I don't beg, and so forth. But if you're in this mode, you're not going to build. You're just going to be on the surface begging and in a rush, and you're going to say, oh, I'm not going to be in a rush anymore, but then you're going to find yourself in a rush every new day and acting desperate when you're not. And then and this relates to those 4 quadrants. He doesn't explain it in this way, but Stephen Covey in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about urgence and importance and how we want to spend our most time in things that are important but not urgent. And instead people spend their time with things that are urgent and important and things that are urgent and unimportant. But then they never kind of get out of the treadmill, and instead you want to spend your time on things that are important but not necessarily urgent. Well, this explains what's going on much more, in a sense, more deeply, and in terms of your mind and goals and foundational things in life. People can read that, and it doesn't matter, even though it's correct and useful. And I totally like his book, and I respect Stephen Covey. But when fight or flight or feeding or sex just feels like the only way to be, then building feels wrong. Except when you need to, you quickly just build something out of understanding, and building feel like something to get done with as soon as possible. And that's when someone will come into OMG and be like, how fast can I do this? Where's the information? Where's the search box? Can't they get to the point faster? Right? Because they're in this desperate mode. But everyone's in this mode. Don't put a value judgment to this where you need to convince yourself that you're not like this. Right? By default, we're all like this. But if you stop and recognize, okay, I've eaten and I have food for later. I deal with sex, however, but not where it's an urgent thing, whenever that can just ping me, right? Just like I don't like to have a lot of notifications or I have nothing that notifies me. The only thing that can notify me when I don't want it to possibly is my phone if it's on, and I pay attention to when it's on or not. I often leave it on, but not many people have my number, and so on and so forth. So very few things could just reach out and get me in life, like ping me and so forth in a way that I don't want. And so you don't want opportunities to do that to you, sex to do it for you, and so forth, or just desperate financial situation to do that to you. If you're in this, focus on getting out of it, and realize, and a lot of it you're already out of, but you just project yourself back into for no reason. then that'll just block you. You can understand everything I'm saying and feel like it's brilliant and still not do it if you don't realize to stop projecting this fight, flight, feeding, or sex mode onto life constantly. Again, you should basically never be in a rush. Almost never or never. I don't mean that you're bad if you're, right? You never should feel bad about anything either. I'm just telling you about what you want to build out of, what your target should be. If you're in a rush consistently, then your target should be understanding this and getting out of the rush. Think, where's the true, real rush coming from? Is someone going to physically hurt me? Or am I going to starve or get killed by the elements? But I literally ask that. And it sounds weird to someone else hearing me say it. But what's weird is actually not thinking that way. If no one's just going to come after you physically, right, because of something that you didn't do that day, and if you can feed yourself and not lose your job or whatever, and keep a roof over your head, then you're out of that mode. That's critical. Get used to asking yourself if you need to be in that mode or not. And then take a deep breath and you build. And this lets you focus on, I think it's quadrant 3 he talks about in 7 Habits, but your offer toolbox or your life toolbox of ideas and your model, for getting your model and ideas right. Then as you build this and you pay attention, then you feel the importance of your understanding method. And you build here and have a feedback loop here, then life becomes easier and easier and easier. And it can get, relatively speaking, quite easy. It's easier to picture, right? If you have a method for building your offer toolbox and you value that most, and then you value it by learning it and using it, then you keep building your offer toolbox up and refining it, and then whenever something comes up, you're ready for it. Just like I have a great guy who comes and does things to fix aspects of my house, right? Handyman work. He has skills and actual tools, and when something goes wrong, it's easier for him to fix it. And that's how business monetization can be for you. But then I'm glad I got to cover this about that can block it. That's what discussion's for. And thank you, Jennifer. You didn't know that sentence would cost everybody 20 minutes. I'd love to hear more about your understanding about school so we can untangle it from our own minds and prevent teaching those unhelpful things to our kids. Yeah, I'll keep that in mind. I might be able to put it in one of the final 2 sessions that I referred to earlier, where I'll kind of wrap up about mind and goals and wrap up about knowing and understanding. I don't want to, I kind of on purpose don't bash school as much as I could. I certainly bash it, but I don't want to like send anyone into a panic or whatever, just because it's realistically it can be hard to, it's so ingrained in our lives. If we have kids, I mean, it's useful because I have to help you untangle some of the things, right, like that are in your mind. But some of the big ones that I mentioned are feeling like answers are what's important rather than questions. And once again, that relates to this fight or flight mode I talked about, where the less you're out of this urgent rush, the less you're desperate for answers, and the more you can use the method of building understanding and focusing on what you know and building from that, which is one of the ways of expressing the law of implication, which is the other name of the stuff that I teach, law of implication. Another is that teaching and learning is something done to you. I talked about your offer is something done to you or told what you should do. Another is about value that I referred to earlier, in a sense that imagine if value could just be I come up with my own test and teach you how to ace it. And then that means you got value out of alchemy. Well, that's literally how school is. The value is completely circular. It's completely non-foundational. It's built on nothing. Right? They make their own test and teach you what's on it. It's unbelievable. Can you imagine 16 years and you use basically none of it? Right? In like 3 to 6 months, OMGers learn enough to often make more, in many cases, make more than doctors if they, that part of that's based on getting clients and how well they do with that. But at least their knowledge is enough that combined with enough of lead getting, traffic and conversion, that at least is of the value that it could be traded for what a doctor makes, right? Theoretically, and many, many do. And others don't make quite as much as that, but they make half of what a doctor makes after 3 to 6 months of learning, or a year. But even a year is not. The year is more if people take longer to monetize. 3 to 6 months, often part-time. Whereas being a doctor, you're talking about kindergarten through 12th grade, college, 4 more years of medical school, residency, internship. right? Unbelievable. And even and I'm talking about that's the ideal case. That's like the pinnacle of what education can give to you, and most everybody, does worse, right? It seems like half the people that graduate from college work at Starbucks or something like that, which I'm not, no value judgment there, but in order to work at Starbucks, you're not utilizing anything about school. It doesn't mean that it's worse in any way. It might be better, or whatever, to work at Starbucks, but you're clearly not using 16 years of education, because they show you how to do Starbucks tasks at Starbucks. And in most any job, even if it's has more status, whatever, it's the same thing. And almost any exception involves graduate school, which basically proves that 16 years is total nonsense. And even the first couple of years basically prevent parents from teaching stuff the kids should have learned 2 or 3 years earlier, and they'd be better off. Not should have in some abstract sense or moral sense, but if a child learns to read at 3, like with my son, then, and they're surrounded by books, right, hundreds, literally probably over 1,000 books, just physically in their household, then you don't have to convince them to read. They, like in life, they're just so natural and normal that they just do it, and they like it. So it's just easier for a child to learn to read at the age 1, 2, and 3, and then it's easier for them to like reading. It's easier for them to read efficiently and effectively than waiting till 5, 6, or 7. Oh, and languages. You learn more languages, right? A child could learn 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, especially with the internet, like languages, at a very young age too. But people wait. And so school also blocks us and holds us back, because it sets norms and standards that are incredibly low. And then it blocks out other things that are important. It tells us that I know all these things are coming to mind. Again, every time we say to a child, think about that. Do the child a favor and just like punch them in the nose instead. It'll hurt them less. Because that, or learn that. Well, learning kids can do. But thinking is something that that means that's telling them that their default thinking, that they should already know how to think. Or the idea that school teaches people how to think, it certainly doesn't teach them how to think. It teaches them, it reinforces default thinking and worse, and programs them with all kinds of wrong ideas. So things like that. It's probably dozens more if I keep going. Rick wrote, wow, David, you're explaining that last discussion of events and repinging was huge. That makes absolute sense. This is very valuable information to us. This is pure gold to us on some things we're working on. Excellent. Love it. So that's terrific. I don't mind comments like that. You can just tell me how great the presentation was. It's all good. Faith wrote, I really need this. I have a large contact database of people I've met and business cards I've collected over the years. I've not been very good at following up, really because I have probably not understood the need for events or offering them something. Now what I'm doing completely lends itself. See, the other thing about events is they're very non-threatening, right? People can come or not, and don't we like to be on lists where there's events that we might want to participate in, right? And then it's non-threatening. We don't have to participate in some of them, other ones we do. But certainly a person who sends us invitation to events is a valued person, and in that way you become your own connector. Right? But you don't even have to be a connector like in terms of personality. If you're just like an event maker or even a Facebook group maker, then there you go, right? Wonderful. I'm so glad you're excited. And Abby agrees. That's terrific. Mike wrote, I've been sort of a natural connector. Yeah, that matches what it seems like with you, Mike. I've met Mike Rodwell in person. He was at a town next to me and invited me out to dinner with him and a couple colleagues, and I went, and that connected me to some of them. And I could see, not even consciously, for a long time until people started telling me how good I was at it. You see, connectors themselves often don't value what they do. I'm more of an introvert, so not great at opening, right? And good, and you can see the difference. Some people do both, some people do one or the other. Although once I get going and meeting people, I start connecting with them. You are correct that it isn't highly valued in my experience. It also ties into what you've said about reciprocity not being a strong motivator. Right. But the cool thing with a connector is that when someone does, they're such an easy person to like provide value to, because the connectors tend to value your value. They tend to value you, not just valuing them them as a connector, but valuing them and helping them, right? And they kind of take it the right way, because connectors tend to provide value for people kind of first, and so they're less suspicious. What I'm saying here is kind of useful to know. They're less suspicious about you providing value to them, right? Like someone like Mike Long, he meets someone and he thinks about providing value to them first, and he'll have nothing in mind that he wants from that person at first. I mean, sometimes it might be so obvious that, of course, he's aware of what they might be able to do for him in that sense, and it's not like he walks up to like random people on the street necessarily. But he'll meet someone, and just as long as it's generally plausible, let's put it this way, as long as it's generally plausible that that person might be relevant, then he won't be thinking of any particular tit for tat. He'll just be, and I'm strongly guessing Mike Bravo is the same way. And actually, I can even tell from different interactions I've had from Mike, Mike Bravo is the same way. So you, as long as it's like in the general type of situation where the person might overall just have anything to do with something. I know I'm putting that generally, but I have to on purpose. I'm specifically not saying that they have something in mind that's obvious or whatever. They could just be at a party the person's at, and that's sufficient, is what I mean. Like it's different than just walking up to a totally random person. But if they're just generally in a meeting or a party or a get-together or a convention they go to or anything, the same place, and they're talking to them, there can be nothing in mind that a connector has that they're looking to get back. They'll just look to provide value. And therefore, they're less suspicious than many other people about someone doing the same thing with them. And so they're easy to provide value to, easier. And then, and you can just get so far in life doing this with connectors. And then when you get a result, like if you, just to be simple and cliche, if you rank a website for a connector, they're actually got a result, and they'll naturally tell people about it when it's relevant at the right time, and that's even better, right? Connectors will basically give you referrals just more naturally. Other people will be less likely to give you, and natural to give you referrals. You can still get referrals out of non-connectors, but you need to, again, you need to kind of create an environment where referrals feel very normal, a norm and standard, right? Norms and standard pull on people what they do, their own goals. So if a non-connector is a client of yours and you do a decent job or a good job, then if you create an environment where it's normal to give referrals, they'll be more likely to do so. Excellent, Mike. You deserve it. Broadway. You've been such an encouragement over the years in doing Alchemy and so forth, and with actual resources. Mike Broadwell sent me things, and in terms of just take a look at this, or here's or referred me to this or that. It's just very, very similar. Abby wrote, this isn't related to what we're discussing now, but I wanted to note how much I appreciate this segment early on in this webinar about some of the issues in our modern school system. It really truly struck a chord with me. I'm hoping to hear some more insights. Oh, good, and you got some because of Jennifer's question before, so I appreciate that, Abby. Cynthia wrote, I love this information. It will take lots of action and some fun. Very much, yep, especially with the events. Joshua wrote, referrals are always important in the real estate business. Thanks for that, David. I like that. Because the client, and that norms and standards thing as being kind of this invisible pull, like a tractor on more surface goals, is very useful when thinking about referrals, because the more normal you make it feel to give referrals to you, the more normal you make it feel to your clients or customers to give you referrals. In OMG, we make it feel very normal. Not really. We don't really get referrals for our program. It's not that type of thing, right? Our sale, we get affiliates refer people, but not like members. It doesn't work quite that way in most cases. But we get a lot of course, testimonials and earnings reports. And one of the reasons for that, besides that people are successful, of course, that's important. But the other, people can be successful without giving reports, but it feels very, very normal in OMG to give such reports. And that's no accident. And it's a win-win-win for everyone. It's not like it's not manipulative, it's natural. But the fact that it's normal is a very important ingredient, like with Alchemy, right? You need the right ingredients. So people have to actually have success with your product to refer you or to give a testimonial or report of success with a product, but they still won't give it to you in many cases unless it feels normal, or you'll get like 1/10 of them. Because Joshua wrote, because the client referral are greatly appreciated, the realtor looks good, to their family and friend. The realtor helps the mortgage company look great, and the realtor looks successful. And later I get valued back. Yep. Joy incorporated the book, Rebecca. Is awesome. I was at a conference recently with many owners that are making that their core business model. I just finished rereading it. Aha, you'd already read it before. That's awesome, Rebecca. You've had a lot of good preparation coming into Alchemy and OMG. Great to have you here. And thanks for all your contributions in the Facebook group as well. And I'll likely be able to respond more to those over time. Been a little bit more busy than usual lately. And that's kind of coming more to a close. Thank you, Rebecca. I feel blessed that you're here for sure. Sajad wrote, which type of website development contract is better, 100% upfront, 2 partial payment system, or post 100%? That I don't know. I would guess the 2 partial payment, but I don't know for sure. I'm a big payment plan fan myself. So in parallel, I like payment plans. It's important people pay you something, but then the implication of a payment plan is that you're going to deliver, right? And so it's less threatening and kind of all around works well. Robbie, and I know plenty of successful, like our, even Jordan Belfort is speaking at OMG Live. And we should have a webinar explaining about OMG Live soon for anyone who doesn't know and is new. It's coming up in the middle of October. But Jordan Belfort, the real Wolf of Wall Street guy, but he really turned his life around, and he's amazing with his sales training. And so, and he costs money to get there. And, we pay him half when we first make the deal, and then pay him the other half, in that case, right before he comes. But so very successful people use the 2 payment system. So at least that's the case. But I don't know how... let's see, Cotton couldn't necessarily tell you, he might, but I don't know that he does this type of thing. He just does monthly for a payment plan. He said he got that from me with the payment plans, where he doesn't do it infinite. He does a certain amount, and then it's done. So yeah, I gravitate toward the payment system. Robbie Vaughn wrote, a quick question about framing. I am contacting leads via... sorry, quick funny thing though about Cotton figuring out to do it with clients with the payment plan where it ends rather than ongoing forever. And plenty of people do ongoing forever and it works fine for them. But Cotton's success is really astronomical. But I totally didn't think about it when it came to SEO clients myself. I didn't make the connection whatsoever until he did. So kind of a cross credit there that we each deserve. Now that comes up, let me just say something. This is a little bit out of the blue, but about credit. Who gets credit for what? This is a really big potential block in all kinds of relationships with clients, customers, and certainly joint venture partnerships. The simplest thing to realize with credit is that credit can add up to more than 100%. And then look at another way, there's a fallacy with credit that's very easy to do, where someone says, look, if it wasn't for me, this entire result, this entire project, this entire business or whatever would never have happened. Well, sure, but you could potentially say that about 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 people, right? So that's why either you need to understand it adds up to more than 100%, or just look at it a different way. Of course, credit's an example of like a cluster of ideas that you want to get the good part out, or like the berries I've talked about, where you want to separate the good from the bad. People need, even with like alchemy and the stuff that I teach, I want you to credit me in a way that'll benefit you, where if you don't realize where some of these ideas are coming from, or even that I've originated some of these ideas, at least in my own little awareness, the world of awareness of what I've read and seen, then you might project you might project someone else's ideas on top of mine and miss what I'm saying. So that'll be important. And then crediting me with good ideas and helping you will help me help you in the future, right? So we really do need credit for that reason. We can't help people in the future very well if they don't realize what we've already done for them, right? If people don't credit our strengths, then we won't really be able to use those strengths as well in the future. So that's why credit does matter, and you shouldn't be timid or miss out on that. But then you want to understand that it can add up to more than 100%. And then whenever it's not critical, or whenever you can, of course, you want to take credit as little as possible while maximizing the ability to help people in the future, right? So you kind of look at it that way. One thing I said in OMG early on when it was just Mike, myself, and Greg, and this holds true to this time, but I started early on in our internal culture, is that regarding our contribution to the business and credit, we're all like well over 100% in essence, in the sense that we're all providing more than we even expected out of each other or expect out of each other. It's not that we should provide more in the future. What I meant is we already are now, like kind of at the level that we're already doing. It's already such value that we don't need to worry about who's working when or who's doing what or who gets credit for what internally. Like we clearly understand what the different people are doing, and so there's not a problem with benefiting from each other's strengths. And of course, we continue to appreciate people. However, the bigger the group gets, the harder it is when you're appreciating to publicly appreciate people, because then you're kind of implicitly not recognizing somebody else, which could sometimes cause issues. So almost better just to kind of find a way to proactively deal with that. But credit issues, they probably just break up a tremendous amount of businesses and relationships, or put a lot of stress on them, and or often cause people to do work slowdowns. Another big thing, right? If they feel like they're not getting enough credit, or if they're not doing enough, and instead by framing it the way I did is very, very effective. Okay, Robbie asked a quick question about framing. Contacting leads via phone cold calling with the context they own a digital agency, and I was searching for their service and noticed that their website is not mobile friendly. It seems that I'm putting in a lot of effort to send a follow-up email explaining how we would fix it, explaining the offer. Doesn't seem like it fits the frame that I'm a very busy business owner that doesn't have much time to be spending. Okay, so how would I frame that better? Yeah, I realize that busy can kind of demonstrate value. I personally just try to ignore the thing of busy. I don't try to appear busy. I'm often not busy. I'm more flexible. Last month or so, because of the whole new product we were making and the launch of it and doing Alchemy, then I've been pretty taken up, and then some other things I've had to deal with business that have come up, just infrastructure stuff, and a new website platform. But I tend to pride myself on like not being like all busy, or just try to bypass it. For that, I think here. So if I call someone up, I say I own a digital agency. I notice they're not mobile friendly. Follow-up email explaining how we'd fix it. What I would probably do is say I like because I'm relative. You say I'm relatively busy because I'm relatively busy. What I do at this point then is I send you a simple email giving you a sense of what you can do next with us, and there's a web form, and if you fill that out, then I'll have the information. I can respond to that in a more detailed way, and you can even just directly say. That's how I also kind of just separate out for myself the people that are serious about me potentially helping them. It doesn't mean that we're going to do business together, but if you're willing to do that, then I'll invest in you and really show you something specific with your site, what I'll do, and we'll go from there. Right, and so maybe again a simple email with the explanation I gave you. You can tweak the wording and framing a little bit, but that's a reasonable frame. And then, as I said, I don't do split tests, but then you just get a good idea. You try that a bit, and you get a good idea how that's going. But something like that it should be reasonably effective. And then, let me think here. And if you ever feel cold calling can, and especially with something like this, where you have a hook, it can be effective, and if it is, great. But if you're ever doing anything where you're generally getting people where your vector is kind of a little bit against you, and you want something better, then you can go on to some of the other things I said. But there's benefits to just doing the cold calling. If it's working, So, but then you can realize there's other things if it's not. There's nothing wrong with trying to go through the big gate. I don't mean the phone call, or just trying to go straight in the front door, right, or a full frontal assault. If that's working for you, or if it works, then super. It might be the first thing I check, right? It'd be kind of silly to look for a clever way to get into the town if you could just walk through the front door, right? So if that works, great. But then if it isn't working, then you want to have some backup. Megan wrote, knowing what is important, what to value, is such a help to focus on what to work on or build next. Getting in the right environment and valuing it, meeting the connectors and valuing them, building the tools in the toolbox and valuing them, it just keeps building itself. It's a fantastic way to think about method in a clear way that automatically gets rid of so much clutter to calmly keep going. Thank you. You're welcome. Yep, yeah, that's what my type of meta strategy is meant to do for you, so it's perfect. That's what I'm looking to do. Is meta strategy is kind of about what the method is for getting to figuring out your strategy in essence. Thank you, Susanna. She's giving a nice, awesome. She's giving a nice example as suggested by Stephen Floyd, who has great methods for this kind of thing. Appreciate that, Susanna. Chad wrote, this is so profound and so simple, and yet it is so easy to lose sight of. Great, you think I paid these people. You think these are paid plants to say nice things. I appreciate this so much, guys. Just focus on what you want to build instead of spending your time focusing on the result. Right, excellent. Right, you notice the result long enough to figure out what to build, right, what result you want, and then you get your focus back on building up your toolbox and your method of building your toolbox. And that really works. I've been doing that for years pervasively in life, and it genuinely works in every area of life. It is the formula for success and happiness in essence, in that way of thinking. Rebecca wrote, wow, great question to ask yourself. When panic sets in, why are you in fight or flight mode? That is profound because so many people live with that switch on all the time. It's true. It's default. And we're surrounded by it, so it feels normal. Like it feels normal for it to feel normal. That's what I mean. It's what the media wants to keep people. Right, absolutely. We're more of a buying state, right, when we're in a panic. It is a very unresourceful state to live in. Correct. Abby, this was such a wow moment for me just now, too. It's completely mind-blowing as I've started to think about all the ways I've allowed myself to remain in fight or flight type panic mode without realizing how completely unproductive that mindset is. Excellent. This is why, and a lot of what we do at OMG is kind of like a trick to get people into alchemy from my point of view, not from everyone's point of view exactly. But no, this is the kind of thing I want you guys to know because it can just make such a difference in your life. A few minutes of me explaining something can change you for the rest of your life with certain ideas. Mike said not just the media, but the government and more. I had a Chinese engineering professor as a customer for a few years, and he would laugh at how all our politics and news was just fear-mongering. And he could see it. And right, yeah, he could see it as more of an outsider, yeah, but as if it's different there, right? People in other countries love to look down on other countries, and then it's the same everywhere. Yeah, very much. Okay, great little conversation there. I think we're on the front edge, Mike from Bobo wrote, of a major disruption in this area thanks to alchemy and law of implication. Absolutely, that's what I'm looking to do. First, I'm just kind of building my foundation here, and then we'll get it out to more and more people. Brian Wright, so helpful today. Thank you so much, David. Yep, and I'll look to wrap it up soon here. We've been about 2.5 hours. Michael wrote, I've had a grizzly bear chase me for some time now. Finally shook that. Oh, good. I'm so glad, Michael. That's wonderful. Yeah, Mike had a real kind of issue with someone kind of going after him in life, and I'm so glad to hear that you've shaken it pretty well. Amen to that. Yep, exactly. Only have to run faster than the other guy, not the bear. Still running a bit, working on it. No, but it's great. Like the way I explained it, I know you're referring to that. You just have to figure out what's the one thing that you need to really focus on. And if you are in fight or flight mode or feeding yourself mode as a desperate thing, then it's totally good. Just identifying it and then just deal with it. And once you realize that's the only thing you have to deal with in life to get out of it, then it's okay because you're dealing with one thing. You have one active goal, and it's very calming. Even if it's even if you're getting out of a desperation mode, even if you realize, look, there's a bear chasing me, but all I have to do is try to outrun the bear, then it's pretty calming because then you just fully focus on outrunning the bear, and you either do or you don't. But you know at least that the trouble is wondering what you should be doing while you're having to do something. If you can identify what you need to do and do it exclusively, then it's calming, even if you're otherwise would be in a panic. In other words, if you know that all you have to do is panic, then it's very calming. Cynthia wrote, food, yeah, that's excellent for what I was talking about that. This is so incredible. Thanks, David. Michael Long wrote, you're welcome. Right, there's the freeze response Michael Broadwell talks about in fight or flight. Right, you basically get paralyzed. Oh, but the interesting thing is, it's what I just was talking about that this minute, is the freeze comes from not knowing like whether to be in fight, like you're kind of in fight or flight mode and then you don't know but whether you should be doing it or what you should do. You're not going to be frozen if you realize, oh, okay, I need to be in fight or flight, feeding or sex mode right now and take care of it, right? And then you won't be frozen at least, and you'll know what to do. And if you have to be fleeing, then you flee, right? But if you just don't want to be frozen, basically. How does the habit of procrastination fit in the fight or flight? Maybe I'll try to deal with that more specifically when I talk about in my wrap up, probably on the 29th webinar. I'll look to have some more specifics about procrastination. I've talked about it at different points. Mostly it's coming from having multiple priorities that are confused, multiple active goals at a time. Of course, some approach avoidance, where you want to dissolve a cluster, where there's something you want mixed with something you don't want, and then you want to figure out have more clarity about the issue. Where often, once you have clarity, you can either realize, okay, I want this, and I'm just going to go directly after that, and I don't have to have the bad stuff because I cleared it up where I dissolved the bad stuff, or I can distinguish. Or you realize, like with the case of a person, this is easiest to see, I'm only going to get the whole person, like working with me or as a partner or as a client. I don't get to have this client with a few tweaks, or this partner or this wife or husband. You know, most people, without realizing it, they want the person they're married to with a few adjustments. But that person doesn't exist. You'd have to totally start with a whole new person, right? You don't get to have your partner with a few adjustments. That doesn't exist unless, your best chance of getting it anyway is to get out of fight, flight, sex, or feeding mode. And maybe you can build to the point where the person changes, but you're only going to get there by accepting them first. Unless you can fully accept the person the way they are, you're just going to be stuck in a whole number of ways, including them even improving. So either it's a cluster that you have to accept, but then by getting clarity, you realize that, look, these things just come together. Do I want it or not? And then if you, part of the procrastination might come from being unclear about whether you can just get what you want without the stuff you don't. Such as doing a task. Like there's some tasks that you might do. I gave the example of a person, but also there's some tasks where you realistically need to get them done, and realistically you're not going to start out really enjoying them a lot. You might even enjoy them even after 10 minutes of getting into it, or in the future after getting through the first time of doing it. But maybe there's no way that it's going to be your number one favorite thing to do, and you're trying to, without realizing, you're sort of waiting until you feel like you want to do it. But then you realize, look, this is a cluster. If I want the task to be done, I'm going to have to go through doing it the first time. And once you realize you're not going to separate that out, it's all going to come together, and then you just ask, do I want it or not? And then if I put it off, is it going to be niggling at me? I've talked about as well. If it's niggling and you need to do it, then do it now, because you do it later, you have the same problems of doing it, whatever those might be, and benefits, but then you got the whole niggling the whole time, which is like that kind of split focus and annoyance of having to think about doing it, right? So you have to ask, is time on my side or is time against me? Sometimes you're putting something off for a good reason because time's on your side. There might be a better time for it. Or you might have other priorities now genuinely, and it doesn't matter if you do it now or next week, and there's something you need to do now. So that gives you a little bit of some thoughts about procrastination that can be pretty helpful. And that a lot of people probably don't even realize a lot of what I just said in normal life. So there you go. From real life experience, Sajad writes, always be on fight or flight mode rather than feeling depressed and losing hope. Flying and flight always helps break through the wall. Whenever life tries to put me in the box, I expand. Best feeling ever. Oh, maybe that. Oh, you mean fly or flight, and maybe you mean not fight, but you're saying flying. Like you expand. I see what you're saying, that you want to be on expanding out of the box or running out of the box. That's reasonable. And then expanding, you want to think in terms of building. And then you want to think in terms of, whenever you're thinking in terms of building, you want to also think in terms of your method for building. and you want to get the method right, which gets you to foundational thinking rather than just breaking outside of the box. One of the things a lot of people who are attracted to alchemy, they've spent a lot of their life thinking outside the box, but without realizing it being in just a larger box. And they haven't realized to truly think foundationally. 20 minutes well spent. Oh, right, what I talked about, 20 minutes of the spiel that I got on. That was great about the, might have been about referrals, or it might have been the fight or flight. Great, excellent, Brian, I appreciate that. And I'll really be winding up soon here. Let me look here. Did you use the fear video? Wonderful, use the fear video with the dentist. I've gotten a number of dentist testimonials with my fear video. That's on the, it was on the event pages. Some people might not have access to it. I need to import that video into Spec Ops. That's terrific. I love it. You aren't permanently screwed. Great, great testimony for people about the fear video and to remind them about it if they have access and haven't even rewatching it can be helpful. Rebecca wrote, what is the worst case scenario is a good self-talk to have? Let me just think if there's anything to help with that. You can think about worst case. I also try to think, there's something I do other than thinking in terms of worst case, and there's something that I notice with people that sometimes they think in worst case and it doesn't help, and it leads them astray. At least as a quick thing, and I might give this some more thought, at least think what's the, within reason, what's the worst case? People that think like worst case, but it's like outside of what's reasonable to expect, it's often counterproductive where it can cause you to misallocate resources or not take advantage of an opportunity or otherwise. Think about, like, again, what's the worst case that's kind of going to reasonably happen? Unless it's, if there's something unlikely, like very unlikely, but it'll totally take you out, like destroy you, then of course you can think of that. So if it would totally take you out, then you might need to, like a total pitfall or deadfall, then you might need to take that into account. And otherwise, I don't really think about like a worst case. I think like what's kind of reasonably the worst case. Because remember, you're really, whenever you're doing any kind of strategic planning, which is pretty much any decision making should theoretically be strategic planning, anytime you're allocating resources, which means deciding what to do, and often deciding what to say, it's really a strategy question. And if you're not thinking of alternative use of resources, then, and often people don't, even if you theoretically do, people can affirm, oh yeah, alternative use of resources, yeah, that's important. But in reality, that's not how your brain operates. And so unless you stop and really think in terms of alternative use of resources, then, and when you do think in terms of alternative use of resources, then if you think worst case without thinking how likely it is or how reasonable it is, then you can misallocate resources. Does that make sense? Or at least some sense. You can replay that later. Think about it again. Excellent. Thank you, Joshua. Yeah, about slowing down, not being in a rush. Using, if you think you're in a rush, using that as a red flag for wait a second. Why do I need to be in a rush? And maybe you do because you made a commitment that the commitment wasn't very smart. It wasn't calibrated very well. Maybe you could have made the same commitment, but made the offer a little bit different, right? Where you didn't promise quite so much or whatever, and maybe you could have prepared better. And then otherwise, if there's not something like that, then do you really need to be in fight or flight? And then you can work on your building up your toolbox and your method of your toolbox. And be careful about assuming that you have the right methods and just try to build your toolbox. You want to be, as you build your toolbox or your ideas in life, everybody universally makes a mistake of thinking they have the right method for thinking, and they just think without thinking about how to understand what's true. And of course, I've covered this all the way through at Alchemy a lot, but really that's the number one big, most invisible and most important mistake. Talk with kids, not at them. They're so smart. Beautiful. Haha, wonderful. Oh, wow, you were teaching kids to read between 1 and 3 years old. They learn easily and enjoy it. That's awesome. Yeah, with Glenn Doman, right, exactly. That's one of the Glenn Doman, Brill Kids, and some other programs are good programs. And you kind of even combine them. That's how we did it. And that's how I first found out, was the Gentle Revolution books, Glenn Doman. I'm forgetting the full name of their institute now. And then we used my son as a guinea pig, and it all worked. In our case, we didn't actually make it a game when they're that young. We're just a parent enthusiastically doing it and showing the words very quickly, and then reading to them often, maybe 3 new books a day or something like that, and just whatever the mother's interested in enthusiastically, and also not doing really slowly. Adults learn so much more slowly than children do. That's a gross oversimplification, but just practically speaking, when it comes to remembering words and languages, kids are much faster. And so adults make the mistake of showing it for too long and then testing as well is another thing you don't want to do. Okay, I'll wrap things up here. Christos wrote, yeah, right, speaking with them, especially if they want to, right. Christos wrote limitations, environmental, right, and our son, he didn't, and they can read before they can speak, in essence, or they read kind of about in the same. My son's always chances read about as well as he could speak, and maybe a little better. But they might not be able to speak even originally. Limitations, environmental, family, education, locality, and self-imposed. Change the mindset, alchemy. Yep, great. Summary of some keywords there. Thank you. Oh, that's great. Brought both my kids to construction sites, and they end up outshining me on skill level. Can't wait to teach them this stuff. Thanks, David. You're very welcome, Wilton, and welcome. Peter wrote, how can you increase the perceived value of being a connector opener? Maybe I'll have a thought about that when we talk about conversion, but that's a great question to ask. And once you identify the right question, then there you go. You'll get the answer one way or the other. Oh, cool. Napoleon Hill, I'm giving credit. Christos gave a nice link there. Excellent. Yeah. Dealing properly with credit. And Reagan wrote, you can said you can accomplish anything if you don't need to take the credit. What I like to do though is kind of separate out the clusters. Sometimes when, if we say oh, forget about taking credit, the problem is when there's a good thing about it, like identify with credit, where you sometimes need to have people recognize what you did in order to help them more later and use your strength in the future. If you don't identify the positive benefit, then you can't. And hat tip to Tony Robbins here, he kind of said something similar to this. If you identify the positive benefit in something, then it can help someone let go of a habit, because if you can't find a way to get the positive benefit without the bad, then they'll often revert to the whole cluster of the bad habit. Chandra wrote, my fight or flight was learned by my family. They stay in that mode. It is a norm. And it's everyone, Chandra. It's not just you. But yeah, some people have it real strongly. Alchemy has helped me become more conscious of the feeling, and now I stop and breathe and redirect my thoughts when there's no base for the feelings. That's wonderful, Chandra. I'm so glad. And I love the profile picture. That's terrific. Wonderful. Yeah, focus on tools, exactly how athletes perform at the highest level. Mike Broadwell wrote. Almost said rotes, combined a couple words. A golfer looks to execute the next shot, and if he gets upset by the result, it takes him out of the game. Right. You focus on the toolbox, right? But then when you start to focus on the result and the feedback, the result-based feedback too much, right? You take your eye off building the toolbox and the method for building the toolbox, especially. That's your foundation. Then, then life gets hard again. You're very welcome, Michael. You like that, David? OMG is a trick to give you alchemy. It's basically true from my perspective and Mike Long's perspective. Thank you, David. But to make the trick work, we had to make OMG all that much better, right? Faith wrote, thank you, David. The past 3 webinars have been incredible. Wonderful. Glad I finally did some good webinars. I'm totally kidding. You've totally said wonderful things the whole way through. So just in a happy end of the webinar mood here, making a little bit of lighthearted jokes. But I totally appreciate that. That's wonderful. Yeah, talk about offer. It's been a pleasure. I'm glad to do it. I always was looking forward. It's always more fun for me the longer I've gotten a chance to share with people and work with them. It's always much harder up front with my stuff because it's all so new. And a fundamentally new way of thinking, and it mostly consists of people telling people how wrong they are implicitly for a while. So that's no fun, but it has to be done. I try to trick people into when I say that, too, not say it too directly. When I say tricking, of course, I'm only tricking the bad ideas. I'm never trying to give false ideas to trick anyone. I'm just trying to trick people around their defenses for keeping the good ideas out. Shema wrote, joining OMG with Mike Long's testimony of your impact on him and others was the bottom line for my joining. No trick for me. Excellent. I love it. I felt no matter what might surface for me about business and challenges, law of implication could help me frame it in a way like none other. And you have proved that to be true for me. Thank you so much. You're very welcome. Anyone know the author of Joy Incorporated? Richard Sheridan is the author. Of course. Then thank you, Christos. I appreciate it. Mike Long said he's read half of it so far, and it's one platinum hit after the next. Platinum hit is Mike's word for good ideas, good, excellent, new, mind-blown ideas. Thank you for being our opener and connector. Excellent. Yeah, people appreciate Mike better after today. Everyone who benefits from OMG, it happened because of Mike Long in the original sense. Of course, credit is much bigger than 100%, and so obviously the credit goes to the different coaches who have taught you different things and myself for what I've done. But it all wouldn't happen without Mike, period. Not for any of us. None of us would have this without Mike. And by saying that, it also helps you think about, I'm saying that not just to appreciate Mike, but help you think about connectors and openers more. Never thought like that. It's actually true. I found that myself. Right, about the bigger box. Exactly. And getting foundational. Have to think about the idea of foundationalism rather than just thinking outside the box. I completely ignore the idea of thinking outside the box or in the box. I'm fine with that, the right ideas being in the box, being totally cliche. I'm fine with teaching you something that you've heard on greeting cards as long as I can relate it. What happens when you guys feel like I've said something that, of course, you've heard before, sometimes it's unique. But sometimes you've obviously heard something before, and even on a Hallmark card, right? But if it's connected foundationally and proven foundationally, that's why it makes all the difference. So that's what it comes down to. Thanks, David. You're always helping to repair and replace broken windows. Excellent. Shema said, I'm still in the process with LOI and Alchemy to grasp the difference between just moving into a bigger box versus thinking foundational. I haven't got that one yet. Okay, well, I'm really glad you point that out, Shema. I'll really try to do my best to nail that, especially between numbers 29 and 30 of Alchemy. Right, I'll spend about 3 more webinars on offer. I'll deal with product specifically, conversion specifically, and maybe just business strategy specifically. And then the final 2 webinars, I'll try to do kind of a I don't know, recap. Probably, there'll be a new stuff naturally as well, but whatever. Kind of really solidify and consolidate with kind of the general idea of goals, maybe goals and strategy, and then with the method of knowing separately in number 30. You're very welcome, Susanna. Wonderful. Oh, yeah, totally, exactly. Seems like a big one. The whole method for knowing stuff, it relates a lot to the foundational things. Relating things to your consciousness field and things that are like that, but I know that can be a little vague, so I'll keep trying to explain that better. Oh, here's a game token. Here's an example. That's right, squirrel tokens. And then Mike had his website there with his e-commerce site, his old e-commerce site. This is, what was it, 15 years ago, Mike, or more? It was brilliant. It really worked to do this. Shingles, thinking in terms of shingles, instead of just thinking, see, if you don't have the idea of a shingle, then individual examples of shingles don't have a category to go into, and you're not asking the question. You can see examples without, and then you can copy just the example, like putting this website made by such and such, you can copy that. But when you think of the category or the idea of shingles, then you expand, right? When you have the meta idea, in this case of shingles, and this I'm explaining to you about how meta ideas work, then it opens you up to not just copying a specific template and idea, but finding different ways to apply it. Awesome. Okay, guys, we'll wrap up for sure here. You're very welcome, Shirley and Robbie. Thank you, Shirley, for saying that about so many great gems. And you're very welcome. You're welcome, Robbie. Did I say that right? Did I say you're welcome, Robbie? You're welcome, Robbie. That's a sign that I should end the webinar in the next minute or two when the letters no longer get articulated properly. if we have found a client, is there, sometimes I'll read these also just to give ideas for myself for the future. Is there a basic blueprint to follow or a general direction to start off from? First of all, you'll want to develop that you want to develop that often before you get the client or as you're doing it. But then depending on what program you're in, you can ask in the Facebook group, and then we'll certainly be looking to give you systems and the blueprint to follow to start out. And then generally part of also we'll be showing you the skills, and the skills itself, you'll form your own system and blueprint for how you'll fulfill it. It's like your toolbox, and you'll craft your offer, and then you'll fulfill it, like in essence, with your tools that you'll learn or that you have learned, for whatever that's worth. Another rich webinar. Thank you, David. You're welcome, Jennifer. Another Grand Slam event, knocked out of the park. Appreciate that. But a lot of it's the groundwork, right, that we had to lay earlier. Although, of course, you guys have been wonderful the whole way through and appreciative and so forth. This is David. David tricks people to alchemy. Alchemy kicks butt. Be like David. Thank you, Brent. Might have to download that. I'll have to expand it later to download the image. Or maybe we could do that right now. I'll probably screw up the where I am. You can see my folder here, my stuff. All right. Got it. Might even make that my actual alchemy poster for one of these times. But anyway, thank you guys very much. I'll appreciate it all. Where was that? There we go. You're welcome, Joseph and Jamari. Very, very welcome. On how to read faster. I don't really have a quick thing these days. I wish I did. I know people have asked me that. At some point I gave some explanation, I thought, but maybe I can fit in a kind of quick overview. There's one of the ones that I talked about accelerated learning, and I think I talked a bit about the reading. And it was the same one where I talked about the alpha and beta and state and delta and theta states. So that's labeled above the webinar. Might have been kind of in the late teens or something. You're welcome, Peter and Mike Broadwell and Chad. You're very welcome. Chris, yeah, a lot of comments. Welcome. We tricked a few people into buying Spec Ops so that they can get Alchemy. So we have a few more people on than even before. I hope everyone realizes that's a joke. But great. Or that we tricked you in a good way. Wonderful teaching, David. Megan writes, you're very welcome. Listening, digesting, taking notes, reviewing, applying. This is my food. Excellent. Excellent. There you go. That's the food feeding to be in. You're welcome, Vincenzo and Rick. And Rick and Brian and Shema and Chris and Ziela, you're all very, very welcome. It's my pleasure. And also, again, thank you guys so much. Again, wonderful participation. And even just your pure appreciative comments are great because they help people consume this. They help people listen again and understand the value and help me spread this. So thank you so very much for all of that. Heavenly deception, right? And hopefully my message is a little bit different than the Moonies. Mind blown, but new stuff can enter now. Yep. Excellent, Rebecca. Great picture. Okay. Take care, guys. I will end the webinar here, and I will see you all on Monday evening, as long as you can possibly make it then. Wonderful. Yeah, you'll catch up in the replay. You're welcome, Ken. Very much. Alrighty. Okay. Take care, guys. See you soon.